He slammed a legal document onto the counter, looked a total stranger in the eyes, and said the words that would change both their lives forever. "I need a wife, by tomorrow morning." She didn't scream. She didn't run. She looked straight back at him and asked the one question no one had ever dared ask Caleb Anderson: why? If you've ever felt used, overlooked, or reduced to someone else's solution, this story is for you. Hit subscribe. Because what happens next between these two strangers will remind you what real respect looks like. The morning Caleb Anderson walked into Harlan's general store, he had exactly 19 hours left to save everything he had ever built. He didn't announce himself. He never did. He pushed through this door like a man walking into a fight he already knew he couldn't avoid. Shoulders squared, jaw tight. The kind of stillness about him that made the air in the room shift before anyone even turned to look. 3 men were standing near the flour barrels. They saw him and stepped aside without being asked. That was Caleb Anderson. That was what his name did in a room. He moved to the counter and pulled an envelope from inside his coat. He set it down flat, pressed one palm over it, and stared at the wood grain beneath his hand, like the answer to every problem he had ever faced might be hiding somewhere in the knots and lines of that old pine. It wasn't. He knew it wasn't. The answer was somewhere in this town. He just had to find it before the sun came up tomorrow. Behind the counter. Old Harlan was watching him, the way men watch a storm rolling in from the west, with respect and a healthy measure of worry. "You look like a man who hasn't slept in 3 days, Caleb." 2. Same difference. Caleb finally looked up. His eyes, dark gray, the color of rain clouds that hadn't decided whether to break yet, scanned the store with the slow, deliberate focus of someone who had learned long ago that the world rewarded attention. "I need something, Harlan." "Hardware feed. I just got a new shipment of..." "A woman." The store went quiet. Not politely quiet. Not the kind of quiet that falls when someone drops something. The kind of quiet that presses against your eardrums and makes your heartbeat feel too loud. One of the men near the flour barrels cleared his throat. Another suddenly found the floorboards intensely interesting. Harlan set down the box he was holding very carefully. "Beg pardon." "A woman," Caleb said again, quieter this time, which somehow made it worse. "A decent woman. Someone who can hold a conversation, sign her name, and stand in a room full of lawyers without losing her nerve. I need to find one by tonight." Harlan stared at him for a long moment. Then he leaned forward on the counter, lowered his voice, and said the thing Caleb had not expected to hear. "There's a woman renting the back room above the milliner's. Been here about 6 weeks. She's not from here. Nobody knows her people, but I'll tell you this. She argued Thomas Greer down to half price on a bolt of cotton last Tuesday and walked out with her chin up. That woman doesn't rattle easy." Caleb reached for the envelope, tucked it back inside his coat. "What's her name?" "Lily Bennett." He found her not in the room above the milliner's, but crouched behind the building in the alley, repairing the broken wheel of a handcart with a piece of leather cord and what appeared to be a length of wire she had stripped from somewhere she probably shouldn't have. She didn't look up when his shadow fell across her work. "If you're here about the cart, it isn't yours." "It isn't." "Then I'd appreciate being left to finish." She had dark brown hair pulled back in a loose knot that had started escaping at some point during the morning, strands of it falling against her neck, against her jaw. Her hands were steady. Her focus was absolute. She was the kind of woman who, when she decided to do something, did it like the rest of the world could wait. Caleb watched her work for a moment. There was something about the way she moved, efficient, unbothered, that reminded him of the way good cutting horses moved when they were working cattle. No wasted motion, no performance, just purpose. "Are you Lily Bennett?" She tied off the cord, tested the wheel with 2 fingers, and only then looked up at him. Her eyes were the kind of brown that looked almost gold in the right light, steady, direct, the kind of eyes that didn't ask permission to see you clearly. Depends on who's asking and what they want. "Caleb Anderson, and what I want is a conversation." Something moved across her face, recognition of the name quick and controlled, the way a person reacts when they've heard something and immediately decide how much weight to give it. "I know who you are." "Good. Then you know I don't waste time." She stood up. brushed the dust from her skirt with 2 brisk swipes of her hand. She was taller than he'd expected, not by much, but enough to meet his gaze without tilting her head back. Then don't. He reached into his coat and pulled out the envelope. He held it out to her. She didn't take it. She looked at it, then at him, then back at it with the careful attention of someone who had learned that things freely offered were often expensively reclaimed. What is that? A legal agreement, a partnership contract, and depending on how this conversation goes, a marriage license. If he expected her to flinch, she didn't. If he expected her to ask him to repeat himself, she didn't do that either. What did was fold her arms across her chest and look at him with the kind of calm that isn't the absence of reaction, it's the decision to hold it. You want to marry me. I need to marry someone. Harlan told me you were capable. You don't strike me as someone who scares easily, and you're not attached to anyone in this town, which means I'm disposable. The word landed like a stone dropped into still water. Caleb felt the ripple of it. He hadn't expected that. He hadn't expected her to hand the ugliest version of his own logic back to him quite so fast. That isn't what I said. It's what you meant. She tilted her head just slightly. You need someone no one will miss. Someone no one will ask too many questions about. You need someone convenient. I need someone who won't fall apart under pressure. Those aren't the same thing, Mr. Anderson. He stared at her. She stared back. Somewhere down the alley, a horse shifted against its post, and the sound of its hooves against the packed dirt was the only sound between them for 5 long seconds. You're right, he said. They're not. She hadn't expected that either. She could see it in the small adjustment of her expression, the way her chin lifted just a fraction, recalibrating. Why tomorrow? She said. What happens if you don't have a wife by morning? I lose my ranch. The words came out flat and clean and final, the way men say things when they've been living with a terrible truth long enough that the terror has burned down to something quieter and harder. Lily Bennett looked at him for a long time. Then she said, Tell me everything. They sat on the back steps of the milliner's building, not because it was comfortable, but because there was nowhere else to go, where they could speak without being seen or heard, and Caleb talked. He was not by nature a man who explained himself. He had built Anderson Ranch through 20 years of more doing than talking, more deciding than discussing. He had negotiated cattle contracts, survived 3 droughts, lost his father at 17 and his brother at 32. And not once in any of that had he sat down and told anyone the whole truth of a situation from beginning to end. But Lily Bennett sat with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes on his face, and she listened in a way that made it difficult to abbreviate. My father built the ranch in 1851, he began. 800 acres when he started. By the time I took it over, we were at 2,200. We run cattle, some horses. Good land. Good water source, which is the part that matters most right now. The water. There's a man named Nathaniel Crow. The name changed something in the air. Caleb noticed her spine straighten almost imperceptibly. I know that name, she said. Most people in Montana do. He came through Billings about 2 years ago, bought 3 ranches in 6 months. The owners all said they sold willingly. She paused. None of them looked willing. He wants my land, has for 4 years. My water feeds into a creek that runs through the lower valley, and Crow has been buying up everything on both sides of that valley. Without Anderson Ranch, he owns the water rights to most of the western grazing land in this county. And he found a legal way to take it. He didn't find one, he manufactured one. Caleb reached into the envelope and pulled out a single folded document. He handed it to her this time, not as an offer, as information. My father's original land grant had a clause, a stability clause. Old territorial law doesn't come up much anymore because most people don't know it exists. But it says that if the primary owner of a large estate dies without a stable household, and stable is defined legally as a married household with a co-signatory partner, the land is subject to review by a board of investors. She was reading as he spoke. Her eyes moved quickly without the performance of effort that some people put into making reading look laborious. Crow found this clause. Crow has been waiting for this clause. He knew my father added it in 1858. He's had his lawyers sitting on it for years, waiting for the right moment to file a petition. That petition was filed 3 weeks ago. You've known for 3 weeks. I've been fighting it in court for 3 weeks. He took the document back, folded it, returned it to the envelope. The judge ruled yesterday. The clause is valid. It will be enforced. Unless I can produce documentation of a stable married household by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. The ranch goes to the investor board, which Crow controls. So you walked into Harlan's store and asked for a woman. The flatness of the statement carried more judgment than any raised voice could have. I walked into Harlan's store because I'm out of options, Caleb said. My attorney has been up for 36 hours trying to find another legal path. There isn't one. This is the only door still open. And I'm supposed to walk through it with you. I'm asking you to. You're asking me to marry you. Yes. A man I met 20 minutes ago. Yes. To save land I've never seen. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. Not the stillness of someone overwhelmed, the stillness of someone thinking at a speed that their face wasn't yet willing to display. What do I get? The question surprised him, not because it was unreasonable, but because most people wrap that question in softer words. She didn't bother. A house, he said. Food security, a wage if you want one. Whatever the arrangement needs to look like to satisfy the court, we can discuss what it actually is privately. And when this is over, when Crow is dealt with and your ranch is safe, that's up to you. She turned her head and looked out toward the end of the alley. A woman was passing with a basket. She glanced in their direction, then away, indifferent to two strangers having a serious conversation on a back step. You don't know anything about me, Lily said. No. I could be dangerous. You could be. I don't think you are. You don't know that. I know you fixed a wheel with wire and leather cord before noon on a Tuesday. You didn't take a document from a strange man until you understood what it was, and you asked about the water before I finished explaining the problem. He paused. That's enough to tell me something. She looked back at him. I'm not going to be managed, she said. I'm not going to smile and stand in a corner while lawyers talk around me. If I walk into this, I walk in as a partner. You speak to me directly. You tell me what I need to know. And you do not make decisions about things that affect both of us without consulting me first. Agreed. You said that very fast. Because those terms are reasonable, and I'm not an unreasonable man. Most men who say that are. Most men who say it aren't being asked to lose 2,200 acres of Montana land by morning. She studied him. He waited. Outside the town moved around them. Boots on dry ground. Horses. Distant voices. The rhythmic sound of one hammering something somewhere, and the world didn't stop, or hold its breath, or mark the moment in any way. But something shifted. Small. Quiet. Real. I have conditions, Lily said. Tell me. I want it in writing. Everything you just said. I want a document that is separate from the marriage license. A private agreement that outlines what this arrangement actually is, what I'm entitled to, and under what terms either of us can end it. I can have my attorney draft. I'll draft it. He paused. You can do that. I can read Mr. Anderson. And I've learned enough about legal language to know that the devil lives in the words men assume women won't notice. There it was again, that stone dropped into still water. He felt the ripple. All right, he said. Second condition. She held up 2 fingers, the motion precise. No one is told this was arranged. Not the judge, not the lawyers, not the town. We present this as a genuine marriage. I won't lie about the timeline. If someone asks directly how long we've known each other, I'll tell them the truth. But I won't perform a deception that requires active dishonesty. That's more complicated. I know. Those are still my terms. The attorney needs to know the timeline too. The attorney needs to know that we are legally married by morning. The rest is none of his business. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Third condition, she said. There's a third. The moment you treat me like a transaction again, the moment you speak to me the way you spoke to Harlan when you said, I need a woman. Like I'm a piece of equipment, this arrangement ends. I walk away. Whatever the legal consequence of that, I will accept them. But I will not. She stopped. Let the silence hold the weight of it. I will not be that, she finished. Caleb Anderson sat very still. He had negotiated cattle prices with men who carried guns. He had sat across tables from lawyers hired to break him. He had looked at 20-year droughts and 3-day blizzards and a father's coffin and an empty chair at Christmas, and he had not bent. He sat on the back steps of a milliner's building in a town he rarely visited, and he felt for the first time in a long time that he was talking to someone who was not afraid of him. It wasn't unpleasant. Those are fair conditions, he said. I know they are. Do we have an agreement? She looked at him. He looked at her. We have the beginning of one, she said. Let me see your legal papers, all of them. Then I'll decide. They spent the next 4 hours in the back room of the sheriff's office, the only space Caleb could get access to on short notice, with a table large enough for documents to be spread out and a door that locked. Deputy Malone offered to stay. Caleb had told him no. Lily had said simply, "Thank you, we'll manage." And the deputy had left faster than if Caleb had said it, which told Caleb something about the way Lily Bennett moved through rooms. She read everything. Not quickly, not performatively, slowly, with focus, one document at a time. She occasionally asked questions. Direct ones. Specific ones. Not the questions people ask to seem engaged, the questions people ask when they actually understand what they're reading. This investor board, who are the actual members? I have 3 names. I believe there are 5 total. Which 3? He told her. She nodded slowly. Do you know a man named Gerald Forsyth? Not personally. He's a banker out of Helena. He's also Crow's brother-in-law. Caleb went still. How do you know that? Because I read the Helena Gazette when I was living there, and when Forsyth's sister married Crow, they put it in the society pages. She set down the document she was holding and looked at him directly. If Forsyth is on that board, the vote was decided before they filed the petition. You understand that? Yes. So we're not just trying to satisfy a legal clause. We're trying to make it impossible for them to challenge the marriage itself, the authenticity of it, the legality of it, every detail of its structure, so they have no remaining legal avenue. That's correct. Then the private agreement I'm drafting can't exist on paper, not yet. Not until this is fully resolved. He hadn't thought of that. He should have, but he hadn't. He had been operating on 4 hours of sleep and the particular tunnel vision that comes from running toward a wall and having no idea what's on the other side. You're right, he said. I usually am. The words weren't arrogant. They were simply true, and she knew it, and she didn't feel the need to soften it. The moment there's a paper trail showing. This was a business arrangement. Crow's lawyers can argue the marriage is fraudulent and petition for the clause to be enforced anyway. So we have no written agreement. We have a verbal one, and a witness. Who? She looked at him. Me. There was a long pause. You're going to trust me, he said slowly. And I'm going to trust you. That's the only way this works, Mr. Anderson. Caleb. She blinked. First time he'd surprised her. What? If we're doing this, it's Caleb. She was quiet for a moment. Then something moved across her face, not quite a smile. Something smaller and more considered than a smile. All right, Caleb. What do I call you? Lily. A beat. That's the only name I answer to. The preacher was a man named Josiah Holt, 60 years old, a stomach like a rain barrel, and the slow, careful manner of someone who had learned to read rooms before he read scripture. He arrived at 8:15 in the evening. I was not surprised to see them. Caleb had sent word ahead. But he was surprised when he sat down across from them to find that Lily Bennett was the one who spoke first. Reverend Holt, before we begin, I want to make sure you understand that this is a legal ceremony. We are adults who have made a free and deliberate decision. I'm not being coerced and I'm not uncertain. I want that clear. Holt looked at her, then at Caleb, then back at her. That's an unusual opening, Miss Lily. And I say it because in my experience, when a woman stands in front of a preacher under unusual circumstances, Certain assumptions get made. I'd rather address them directly." Holt was quiet for a moment. Then he folded his hands on the table and said with what appeared to be genuine respect, "Then we'll proceed." The ceremony was brief, not cold brief. There was a dignity to it the way there is dignity to anything done with full attention and honest intention. Caleb said what was required. Lily said what was required. Their voices were steady. When it was done, Holt signed the license. His deputy witness signed it. Caleb signed it. Then the pen was passed to Lily. She held it for just a moment. One heartbeat, too. And Caleb realized watching her that this was the first moment she had slowed down. The first moment the weight of it had visibly rested on her, just for a second before she lifted it again and carried it the way she seemed to carry everything quietly, squarely, alone. She signed. The ink dried. And just like that, 19 hours after Caleb Anderson had slammed a legal document onto a counter and said the words that would change both their lives, Lily Bennett became Lily Anderson. She set the pen down and looked up to find Caleb watching her. "Don't make me regret that," she said. "I won't," he said. He meant it when he said it. He had no way of knowing in that moment how much harder it would become to keep that promise than he could possibly imagine. They rode out to Anderson Ranch before midnight. Not because they had to, the legal filing wasn't until morning, but because Caleb's attorney, a sharp-shouldered man named Edmund Rowe, who had been working 18-hour days for 3 weeks, needed the license in hand before the courthouse opened. Lily rode well. Not like someone performing the ability to ride like someone who had learned on difficult horses in difficult terrain and had the quiet efficiency of it settled into her body. Caleb noticed this, the way he noticed everything about her carefully without showing it. He had a habit cultivated over 20 years of running a large operation of watching people in the first minutes of a new environment. The way a person entered a room, mounted a horse, handled an unexpected obstacle. These things told him more than any conversation. Lily Bennett riding beside him through the dark Montana landscape told him several things. She was not afraid of the dark. She was not a woman who needed conversation to fill silence. And she was studying the land around her with the same focused attention she had brought to his legal documents, reading it, measuring it, filing away information she might need later. "How far?" she asked. 20 minutes. "The water source, the creek that feeds the valley. How close to the main house?" "About a quarter mile north." "Does Crow have anyone watching it?" The question stopped him cold. "What makes you think?" "Because if I were Crow, and I had been working toward this for 4 years, I would have had someone watching that water source for the past 3 weeks. Waiting to see what you did when the petition was filed. Where you went, who you talked to, whether you were running scared or running a plan." Caleb had not checked. He had been so focused on the legal fight on the courtroom, on the documents and the deadlines, that he had not thought to look at his own land from Crow's perspective. The realization landed with the particular discomfort of seeing a mistake too late to undo. "I need to check that in the morning." "Tonight," Lily said. "Check it tonight." "It's nearly midnight." "I know what time it is." He looked at her. The moonlight was enough to see her face, the steadiness of it, the absolute lack of drama. "You're serious. If there's someone on your land recording your movements, Caleb, and they see a strange woman ride in with you tonight and be present at the filing tomorrow morning, they will report that to Crow immediately. Which means Crow will know the nature of this before the judge does. He already knows I'd try to. Knowing you'd try is different from knowing you succeeded. And knowing you succeeded tonight means he has until 9 a.m. tomorrow to file a counter-challenge." She paused. "How good are his lawyers?" "Very." "Then we check tonight." They checked tonight. It took 40 minutes riding the perimeter of the north property line in the dark, Lily following without being asked, holding her horse quiet. They found the watcher at the ridge above the creek, a man on horseback far enough back to be invisible from the ranch house, close enough to have a clear view of the main approach road. Caleb felt something cold move through him that had nothing to do with the night air. "How did you know?" Lily was looking at the distant shape of the watcher through the darkness. "Because men like Crow don't leave things to chance," she said. "They plan for every outcome, including yours." You know men like Crow." She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice had a quality he hadn't heard from her before. Not harder exactly, but older. Like something that had been worn smooth by handling. "Once," she said. Briefly. And only once. She didn't elaborate. And Caleb, who was not by nature a man who pressed for things he wasn't offered, let it rest. But he noted it. He noted it the way he noted everything about her. Carefully, without showing it. Edmund Rowe was awake when they arrived at the ranch house. He had coffee on a lamp burning, and the expression of a man who has been holding his breath for 18 hours and is still not sure whether to exhale. He looked at Caleb, then at Lily, then at the document Caleb placed on the table in front of him. He picked it up, read it, set it down. Then he sat back in his chair and put both hands flat on the table, as if he needed to feel something solid. "You actually did it." "We actually did it," Lily said. Rowe looked at her again more carefully this time, the way lawyers look at people when they've just revised their initial assessment. Mrs. Anderson," Lily said, not correcting him aggressively, simply accurately. "Mrs. Anderson." He glanced at Caleb. "Does she know the full scope of what we're dealing with?" "She knows more than I did 3 hours ago," Caleb said. "Forsyth, she spotted it." Rowe went very still. "What about Forsyth?" "He's Crow's brother-in-law," Lily said. "If he's on the investor board, you need to know whether the other members are aware of that relationship, because if they're not, it constitutes an undisclosed conflict of interest, and the entire petition may be challengeable on those grounds." The room was very quiet. Rowe looked at Caleb. Caleb looked at Rowe. "I didn't know that," Rowe said. "I know you didn't," Lily said, not unkindly. "Can you verify it before 9 a.m.? Yes. I have a contact in Helena who—" Rowe was already reaching for paper. "Yes. I can have confirmation by 7. "Good." Lily pulled out a chair and sat down. "Then let's look at everything else." Caleb stood at the edge of the room and watched his attorney and the woman he had married 4 hours ago lean over a table full of legal documents. He had walked into Harlan's General Store 19 hours ago needing something convenient. He had found something else entirely. I wasn't sure yet what to call it. But he knew with the same instinct that had kept him alive and solvent through 20 years of hard decisions, he knew that it mattered. At 3 in the morning, Lily set down a document, pressed her palms against her eyes for a moment, and said, "There's a problem." Rowe looked up. "What?" "The stability clause. We've been reading it as requiring proof of marriage, but look at the third subsection." She slid the document across to Rowe. He read. His face changed. "It doesn't just require marriage," he said slowly. "It requires proof of established cohabitation." Lily tapped the page. "Not married, not legally partnered, living together, under one roof, for an unspecified but credible period of time." The word credible sat in the room like a stone. "Crow knows this," Caleb said. "Of course he knows it." Lily sat back. "He filed the petition knowing you'd scramble to get married, and then tomorrow morning after you produce the license, his attorney stands up and says, 'Your Honor, we submit that this marriage was arranged in the past 24 hours, specifically to circumvent this clause, and that there is no established cohabitation, and therefore the legal requirement has not been met.'" Silence. "Can he do that?" Caleb asked. Rowe was very still. "Yes, he can do exactly that." Caleb looked at Lily. Lily looked at Caleb. And in that look over a table full of documents in a lamplight kitchen at 3 in the morning, after 19 hours of the strangest and most consequential day, either of them had lived was the wordless recognition of exactly how much trouble they were still in. "So," Caleb said. "So," she agreed. "What do we do?" She folded her hands. She thought. And then, for the first time since he had found her in that alley with a piece of wire and a length of leather cord. Lily Bennett smiled. It was a small smile. Quiet. Private. The smile of someone who just found the loose thread in a knot they've been staring at for too long. "We tell the truth," she said. We've known each other for 19 hours. No, she said. We've known each other for 6 weeks. The room went still. Lily, I've been in this town for 6 weeks, Caleb. I've been seen at Harlan's store, at the post office, at the milliner's where I rent a room. I've been seen by half the people in this county. She leaned forward. None of them can say with certainty that we haven't known each other during that time. None of them have followed you every time you came to town. That's a gamble. Everything about today has been a gamble. Roe was already thinking. If we can produce witnesses who've seen them together even casually in the past 6 weeks. You can't produce witnesses to things that didn't happen, Caleb said sharply. We don't need to produce them, Lily said. We need to establish that no one can prove they didn't happen. There's a difference. She looked at him steadily. I'm not asking you to lie, Caleb. I'm asking you to stop volunteering a timeline. He held her gaze. The lamp between them burned low and steady. That's a finer line than I'm comfortable with, he said. I know. And if it falls apart, then we fight whatever comes next, she said simply. But I'd rather fight from the best position we can build than from one we didn't bother trying to construct. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, all right, she repeated. Edmund, Caleb said without taking his eyes off Lily. Make the coffee stronger. We've got 5 hours. At 8:47 in the morning, Caleb Anderson and Lily Anderson walked into the county courthouse. Lily wore the best dress she owned, dark blue, simply cut, nothing borrowed or rearranged. She had pressed it herself in the early hours before dawn, and it looked like what it was, a woman who had what she had and wore it with the dignity of someone who needed no embellishment. Caleb walked beside her. Not behind her, not ahead of her. Beside her. It was a small thing. It was a very small thing. But it was the thing that 3 of the people in that courthouse would remember and comment on years later when they told the story of that morning. The morning Caleb Anderson and his wife walked into that room together. The Crow team was there. 4 lawyers, 2 clerks, and Nathaniel Crow himself, a broad man in a dark coat with the patient, comfortable look of someone who has been certain of a favorable outcome for so long that the certainty has become indistinguishable from his personality. He looked at Lily once. Then he looked at his lawyers and said something quietly. One of the lawyers, young, sharp-suited, leaned forward and began arranging papers. Roe took his place at the filing desk. He placed the marriage license on the counter. He placed the supporting documentation beside it. He straightened. And then from behind the cluster of Crow's legal team, the young, sharp-suited lawyer raised his hand and said, "Your Honor, on behalf of Crow Investments, we wish to register an objection." Caleb didn't look at Lily. She didn't look at him. They both looked forward. "The nature of your objection," the judge said. "We submit that this marriage was arranged within the past 24 hours, specifically to circumvent the terms of the stability clause, and that no credible cohabitation has been established. Therefore, the clause remains unmet." The judge looked at Roe. Roe looked at the judge. "Your Honor, my clients have been acquainted for a period of approximately 6 weeks. The timeline of their marriage can be verified," the young lawyer cut in, "by the fact that the license was obtained last night." "A license obtained last night documents when the license was obtained. It documents nothing about the nature or duration of the relationship itself." The judge raised a hand. "Is there further documentation?" "There is, Your Honor." Roe placed 3 more documents on the counter. Lily had drafted them between 3 and 5 in the morning, statements signed by Harlan by the woman at the milliner's, where she rented her room, by the deputy who had helped them access the sheriff's back room, each saying in careful and specific language that they had observed Caleb Anderson and Lily Bennett in each other's company in this town over the prior several weeks. Not that they had seen a romance, not that they had witnessed anything specific, only that they had observed them in each other's company. Which technically was not false. Because every person in that town had seen Caleb come through, and every person in that town had seen Lily, and no one could say with sworn certainty that those 2 people had not been aware of each other during that time. It was the finest line Caleb Anderson had ever stood on. He stood on it without moving. The young lawyer read the statements. His jaw tightened. He leaned back to his colleagues. There was a murmuring. Nathaniel Crowe, who had been watching all of this with his patient. Certain expressions stopped looking patient. His eyes moved to Lily. She felt them. She did not look back. She stood beside Caleb Anderson, straight and still, and she let the moment do what moments do. When you've built them as carefully as you can, she let it hold. The judge read the documentation. He looked at the stability clause. He looked at the marriage license. He looked at the signed statements. He set everything down, folded his hands, and looked at both parties. The documentation is in order, he said. The stability clause is satisfied. The petition of Crowe Investments is denied. The room was very quiet. Then Edmund Rowe breathed a single long, controlled exhale that he had clearly been holding for 3 weeks. Nathaniel Crowe stood very still. Then he turned and left the room without speaking to anyone, his lawyers scrambling to follow, and the door closed behind him with a sound that was final and ordinary, and nothing like the ending of something that had cost this much. Caleb turned to Lily. She was looking at the door where Crowe had exited. Her face was unreadable, but her hands at her sides were pressed flat against her skirt, the only sign of what it had cost to hold still through all of that. It worked, Caleb said. It worked, she agreed. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said quietly, so that only she could hear, I need you to know something. She turned to look at him. I said I needed a wife by tomorrow, and I did. He paused. But I want you to know that when I walked into that room this morning, I wasn't thinking about the ranch. She held his gaze. What were you thinking about? She said. I was thinking I didn't want to walk in without you beside me. The room around them was beginning to move. Rowe gathering papers, the clerk filing documents, the ordinary machinery of a resolution clicking into motion. Lily Bennett. Lily Anderson stood very still in the middle of all of it. And for the second time that morning, she smiled. Not the small private smile of someone who found the loose thread in a knot. Something different this time. Something that had no calculation in it at all. Good, she said. Just that. Good. And Caleb Anderson, who had survived harsh winters and difficult cattle seasons and dishonest businessmen. And every kind of loss that Montana could hand. A man felt something he hadn't felt in longer than he could name. Felt it walking out of that courthouse beside Lily, into air that was cold and clean and completely indifferent to everything they had just survived together. The feeling didn't last long. It rarely did in Caleb's experience. Edmund Rowe caught up with them before they reached the horses, his coat flapping, papers tucked under both arms, breathing harder than a man his age should after a flight of courthouse steps. We won the morning, Rowe said low and fast. Don't mistake that for winning the war. Crowe will file again. He has 3 other legal mechanisms I know about and probably 2 I don't. This bought us time, that's all. How much time? Caleb kept walking. Weeks, maybe a month if we're careful. He'll need to regroup, reassign his legal team, find another angle in the land grant documents. Rowe glanced at Lily. The Forsyth connection that was significant. If I can get confirmation from Helena by end of week, we may be able to file a counter-petition that disqualifies the entire investor board. Do it, Lily said. Rowe looked at her, the way he had been looking at her all morning, with the recalibrating attention of someone encountering a thing they hadn't prepared for. I'll need to verify the familial relationship through public records. Helena County marriage filings approximately 2 years ago. It may take... The Helena Gazette ran the announcement in the second week of October 1880. Society page left column. Lily reached the horses and checked the cinch on her saddle with 2 practiced pulls. The reporter's name was H. Alcott. If the paper still has its archives, that's your fastest confirmation. Rowe stared at her. Then he turned, walked back toward the courthouse without another word, and pulled the door open with the focused momentum of a man who has just been given a direction and intends to move in it. Caleb swung into the saddle. Lily mounted without assistance, fluid, efficient, no drama in it, and settled like someone whose body had long since decided that a horse was a natural place to be. They rode in silence for the first several minutes. Not uncomfortable silence. The kind that exists between people who have been through something together and don't yet know how to talk about the fact that they survived it. It was Lily who broke it. "Your men," she said. "How many on the ranch?" "Full-time 7. Seasonal, another 4 or 5. "Do they know what happened this morning?" "Roe sent word last night that we were filing. They know there was a legal challenge. They don't know about me." "No." She absorbed this without visible reaction. "How will they take it?" Caleb thought about this honestly, because she was the kind of woman who noticed when you gave her a dishonest answer. "Depends on the man," he finally said. "Walt, my foreman, he'll take it at face value. He doesn't concern himself with things outside his work. Tom Briggs will have opinions. He always has opinions. The others will follow whatever Walt does. And Tom Briggs's opinions, are they the kind that stay in his head, or the kind that come out of his mouth?" "The second kind." "Then I'll talk to Tom Briggs first." Caleb looked at her. "You don't need to manage my men. I'm not managing anyone." Her voice was even without edge. "I'm going to be living and working on that ranch. If there's a man there who has a problem with me, I'd rather know about it in the first hour than discover it 3 weeks from now, when it's become something harder to address." He couldn't argue with that. He had run his operation long enough to know that small tensions left unaddressed became large ones. He simply hadn't expected her to know it too. "All right," he said. She nodded once, and they rode on. Walt Greer was standing in the yard when they arrived. He was a compact man somewhere north of 50, with the weathered look of someone who had spent 30 years outdoors and had made his peace with what that cost. He had worked for Caleb's father before Caleb, and he ran the ranch with the quiet, undemonstrative competence of someone who had long since stopped needing to prove anything. He watched them ride in. He watched Lily dismount. He watched Caleb dismount. Then he said, "Everything settle out at the courthouse." "Filed and approved," Caleb said. Crow's petition was denied. "Good." Walt's eyes moved to Lily, not with hostility, not with warmth, with the careful assessment of someone who spends his days evaluating animals and land and humans for the same quality, whether they'll hold up under pressure. "Walt," Caleb said, "this is Lily Anderson, my wife." Walt was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then, "Ma'am, Mr. Greer." Lily met his gaze directly. "I understand you've run this ranch for a long time. I'm not here to change what works. But I'm going to need someone to show me the water system within the hour. Would you be able to do that, or should I ask someone else?" Another beat of silence, this one different in quality. "I can do it," Walt said. "Thank you." She handed her reins to the nearest hand, without looking to see if he took them. The practiced confidence of someone who knew he would, and turned to Caleb. "The water first," she said. "Then I want to see the fencing on the north perimeter." "The fencing is fine." "I know it's fine. I want to see it anyway." She walked with Walt toward the north pasture, and Caleb stood in the yard and watched her go, and the ranch hand who had taken her reins said very quietly to no one in particular, "Well." Caleb knew exactly what he meant. Tom Briggs found her at the water junction at the edge of the north pasture. She was crouched beside the primary diversion gate, with Walt asking him something specific about flow rates, when Briggs walked up behind them with the particular quality of stride that means a man has something to say and has been waiting for permission to say it. He didn't wait. "You're the woman Anderson married." Lily didn't stand up. She asked Walt one more question, waited for the answer, then stood, brushed her hands together, and turned to face Briggs. He was a large man, broad through the chest with a dark beard, and the look of someone whose default expression was skepticism directed outward. He had worked the Anderson ranch for 11 years. He was good at his job in the way men are good at jobs they've done so long it's stopped requiring thought. "Tom Briggs," she said. Not a question. He blinked barely. "That's right." "Caleb mentioned you'd have thoughts about the situation. I'd rather hear them directly than have them reach me through other people." Whatever he had been expecting her to say, it wasn't that. She watched him recalibrate the small shift of weight, the jaw working once before he spoke. "The men are going to want to know who's giving orders." "Caleb is giving orders, same as before." "And you, I'm not here to give orders to your team, Mr. Briggs, but I will be involved in decisions that affect the operation of this ranch. If that's something you can work with, we'll get along fine. No offense intended, ma'am, but you walked in here this morning and no one's ever heard of you. That's a hard thing for men to get comfortable with fast. I know it is. I'm not asking anyone to be comfortable. I'm asking everyone to do their job well while they decide what to think of me. A pause. That's all. Briggs looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Walt. Walt's expression gave him nothing. Fair enough, Briggs said finally. He turned and walked back toward the barn. Walt waited until he was out of earshot, then looked at Lily with the first expression she'd seen from him that wasn't pure assessment. That man has been here 11 years, he said, and I have never once seen him say fair enough to anybody. Lily looked back toward the water gate. Show me the secondary valve, she said. Caleb found her 2 hours later, sitting at the kitchen table, with a hand-drawn diagram in front of her lines and notations that, when he looked more closely, turned out to be a rough map of the ranch's water distribution system. She had a pencil in her hand. She was making marks in the margins. He pulled out the opposite chair and sat down. Walt showed you everything. Walt showed me what he knows. Some of what I'm looking at concerns me. She turned the diagram to face him. This diversion gate here, the North Junction. How old is it? The structure, my father built it. 1860-something. Is it holding? It holds every year. Have you had it inspected this year? He was quiet. Caleb. No. If that gate fails, or if someone causes it to fail, your water flow to the south pastures drops by roughly 60%. Your herd can't sustain that past 2 weeks in summer. She tapped the diagram with her pencil. If Crow can't take this ranch through legal process, he has other ways. Interfering with water infrastructure is one of them. The kitchen was very still. Caleb looked at the map. He knew this land. He had walked every inch of it since he was a boy. But he looked at the diagram she had drawn from 2 hours of observation, and he saw his own ranch, the way an adversary would see it, as a set of vulnerabilities rather than a history. It was not a comfortable feeling. You think Crow would? I think Crow has been working toward owning this valley for 4 years. I think a man who cultivates a legal strategy across that length of time does not abandon his objective after a single courthouse loss. She set the pencil down. I think we need to start thinking about this ranch the way he does. You've been here 6 hours. I know. How do you? Because I grew up watching someone lose everything, she said. The words landed quietly. No drama in them. Just the weight of something true. He looked at her across the table. Your father. She looked back at him for a moment, that careful measuring look he was beginning to recognize, the one she deployed when she was deciding how much of a thing to give. My father built something, she said. He built it carefully over a long time, and someone took it from him because he was too busy trusting people to notice the mechanisms being assembled around him. A pause. He never recovered, not financially, not otherwise. Who took it? She picked up the pencil again. Someone who knew that the best way to take a man's land is to make him believe he still has time. The air between them shifted. Is that why you recognized Crow's pattern? That's why I recognized Crow's pattern. He was quiet for a moment. Then, Lily. She looked up. What you did last night, the Forsyth connection, the cohabitation problem, the way you saw it and solved it before any of us. He stopped, started again. I want you to know that I understand what you did this morning wasn't small. She held his gaze. I know it wasn't. I know it. I'm not a man who says thank you easily. That's a flaw, not a virtue. I'm telling you that because you deserve honesty about who you're dealing with. Something shifted in her face. Something careful and practiced relaxed just fractionally. I appreciate that, she said. But I need you to also tell me things, he continued. Not just solutions, not just the finished thought. If you see something, I need to know how you're seeing it. If you're worried, I need to know what you're worried about. I can't run this place with a partner who operates alone. She was quiet for a moment, then very quietly. I've operated alone for a long time. I know, so have I. He leaned forward. I'm not asking you to stop being who you are. I'm asking you to let me be in the same conversation. She looked at him across the table, across the hand-drawn map of his ranch and his water, and all the things that could be taken from him. And she seemed to be doing the thing she did when she was deciding how much of a thing to give. She decided. "All right," she said. "Then I'll tell you what I'm actually worried about. Tell me." "The watcher at the ridge last night. He saw us ride the perimeter together. He saw us check the north water line at midnight. He will have reported that to Crow." She looked down at the map. "Which means Crow knows two things now that he didn't know yesterday morning. That you have someone with you who thinks like a strategist, and that you already know he has people watching the water." Caleb understood immediately. "He'll accelerate." "He'll accelerate," she confirmed. "Whatever his next move was going to be, he'll move it forward. We have less time than Roe thinks." Outside, the wind picked up. The sound of it moving through the eaves of the old ranch house was a sound Caleb had heard 10,000 times. Right now, it sounded different. It sounded like a clock. "What do we do?" he said. "We don't wait for him to choose the ground," Lily said. "We choose it first." The telegram arrived at 4 in the afternoon. It came addressed to Caleb Anderson, care of Anderson Ranch, and the hand who brought it from town rode hard enough that the horse was still blowing when he pulled up in the yard. Caleb read it once. He read it again. He walked into the kitchen where Lily was still at the table. She had added 3 more pages to her notes since morning, and he set the telegram in front of her without a word. She read it. Her face didn't change, but her hand, which had been holding the pencil, set it down on the table with the careful deliberateness of someone making sure they don't grip something too hard. The telegram was from a man named Robert Lyle. It identified him as a land assessor operating on behalf of the Territorial Governance Board. It stated that in light of a request filed by Crow Investments, a formal assessment of Anderson Ranch had been ordered not of the legal title, but of the operational viability of the estate under its current management. The assessment was scheduled for 1 week from Thursday. "He found another angle," Caleb said. "He didn't just find one, he had this ready." She tapped the telegram. "This was filed yesterday before the courthouse this morning. He knew the Stability Clause challenge was a long shot. This was the contingency. An operational assessment, which means a panel of men chosen by the Territorial Board will come here, look at the ranch, evaluate its management and financial health, and produce a report that will be used to determine whether Anderson Ranch is a viable, well-managed operation or a struggling estate that would benefit from investor oversight." She looked up at him. "Do you know who appoints the Territorial Governance Board?" He knew the answer before she finished the question. "The governor," he said. "And the governor's main campaign donor 4 years running is Nathaniel Crow," she finished. The room was very quiet. "How did you know that?" Caleb's voice was careful. "Because I've been asking questions in this town for 6 weeks, while everyone assumed I was just a woman renting a room." She held his gaze. "People say things in front of women they believe aren't paying attention." It landed with the force of something quietly devastating. He had hired men. He had built walls. He had fought in courtrooms and across negotiating tables and in the kind of silent battles that happen over years between men who want the same piece of land. And the person who had walked into his war with more useful intelligence than anyone in his orbit had been a woman in a rented room whom everyone had ignored. "6 weeks," he said slowly. "You've been here 6 weeks. Lily, were you?" He stopped. Reorganized the question. "Why were you in this town?" She looked at him. This was the moment. He could feel it, the particular quality of a moment when the answer to a question is either going to open something or close it. "I came looking for information," she said. "About what?" "About Crow." The single word fell into the room like a stone into deep water. "About Crow," Caleb repeated. "About how he operates, who his people are, where he moves money and why. I've been tracking him for 18 months. Caleb did not move. "Why?" "Because he's the man who took my father's land." She said it without heat, without trembling, with the flat, controlled clarity of something that has been reduced by time and grief and purpose from a wound to a mission. Not personally. He used the same method, legal mechanisms, manipulated boards, manufactured technicalities. My father's ranch was in Wyoming, smaller than yours, but the method was identical. And you've been following him. I've been documenting him. There's a difference. Lily. I have records, she said, cutting through whatever he was about to say. 18 months of records. Transactions, land transfers, board appointments, political contributions, business relationships. I have the kind of documentation that if it reached the right person, a federal marshal, a territorial attorney general, someone outside Crow's sphere of influence could end what he's doing permanently. The kitchen felt very small suddenly. Why haven't you used it? Because I haven't been able to get it to the right person. Everyone I've approached at the state level either knows Crow or owes him something. And if I go to the wrong person and Crow finds out the documentation exists, it disappears. And so might I. Caleb stared at her. Does anyone know you have this? No one. Not until right now. Why are you telling me? She looked at him, direct, steady, the gold-brown eyes that didn't ask permission to see clearly. Because you just asked me to let you be in the same conversation, she said. And I decided that means I tell you things that are real, not just things that are useful. The distinction she was making between useful and real landed somewhere deep in his chest. Where are these records? Somewhere safe. Lily. I'll show you, she said. But not tonight. Tonight I need to think about this assessment, and so do you. He wanted to push. He was a man who, when given a thread, pulled it. But she had just done the most honest thing anyone had done with him in longer than he could remember. She had chosen to trust him when she didn't have to, when she had been operating without trust for 18 months and had managed fine. He would not repay that by pulling the thread. All right, he said. The assessment. The assessment is actually an opportunity, she said. If the panel comes here and finds a ranch operating at its best, organized, financially sound, well-managed, with the kind of operational clarity that makes it obvious this land is in good hands, then Crow's report comes back positive, which defeats the purpose of his filing. Crow controls who's on the panel. He controls the appointments. He doesn't control what the panel finds if what they find is undeniable. She pulled a fresh sheet of paper toward her. 1 week from Thursday. That's 11 days. What's the current state of your books? Good. How good? We had a strong cattle season. Accounts are settled. No outstanding debts. Roe has all the financial documentation. Yes. I need to see it tomorrow. All of it. And I need to spend time with Walt this week going through every operational system on this property, so that when that panel walks through that gate, everything they look at tells the same story. She was already writing. Who manages the books? Roe mostly. I review them quarterly. Monthly from now on, and I'll need my own set of copies. Why copies? She looked up from the paper. Because if something happens to Roe's copies, we still have ours. He looked at her, at the focused, relentless forward motion of her thinking, the way she moved through problems, the way water moves through a landscape not by force, but by finding every available path. You've done this before, he said, not a question. She didn't pretend it was one. I've tried to do this before, she said. For my father. I was too late. A pause. I'm not going to be too late again. That night, Caleb lay awake in the dark of his room, a room he had slept in for 30 years, in a house his father built on land his family had bled for, and he thought about a woman he had met 24 hours ago. He thought about the way she had walked into that courthouse. He thought about what she had said about her father. I thought about 18 months of documents carried by a woman alone through territories where no one was looking out for her, trying to build a case against a man powerful enough to make problems disappear. He thought about what it cost to do that. He thought about the thing she had said to him in the alley, the very first thing when he had explained what he needed, and she had looked at him and said, "If you need someone to sign papers, find anyone. But if you need a partner, treat me like one." He had agreed to those terms in a moment of desperation. He lay in the dark and understood with the particular clarity that comes only at 3 in the morning, when the noise of the day has finally stopped, that he had not fully understood what he was agreeing to. He had thought he was accepting a condition. He had actually been offered a different way of seeing, outside his window. The wind moved across the Montana plain, the way it had moved for 10,000 years before him, and would move for 10,000 after, indifferent and enormous, and completely unmoved by the small urgent dramas of the people living beneath it. Caleb Anderson stared at the ceiling of the room he had slept in for 30 years, and thought about a woman who had come to this town not as a solution to his problem, but with a problem of her own, a wound of her own, a mission of her own, and who had in 24 hours already seen his land more clearly than he had in months. The thought that came next surprised him. He was not afraid of Crow. He had never been afraid of Crow. Not really. Anger was different from fear, and what he felt about Nathaniel Crow was mostly anger. What he felt now, lying in the dark, was something he had not felt in a very long time. He felt like he was not fighting alone. It was a strange feeling. It was a good one. Morning arrived the way Montana mornings arrive in autumn, fast and cold and completely without apology. Lily was already up when Caleb came downstairs. She was at the table with coffee, the diagram from the day before, and 3 new pages of notes that she had apparently written before dawn. Her hair was down the first time he had seen it that way, dark and loose around her shoulders, and she was frowning at a number she had written in the margin of her notes. The concentrated frown of someone who has found an inconsistency. She didn't look up when he came in. "The seasonal hands," she said. 4 to 5, you told me." "That's right. When do they typically arrive?" 3 weeks. He poured coffee. "End of October. Call them in early." He turned. "Why?" "Because we need the ranch at full operational capacity before the assessment panel arrives, and we need 2 additional weeks of visible documented productivity to show them." She tapped her notes. "If seasonal hands arrive 3 weeks early, it signals confidence, not desperation. A ranch that's struggling doesn't bring in extra workers ahead of schedule." He looked at her over the rim of his coffee cup. She finally looked up. "What?" she said. "Nothing." "You're doing that thing where you look at me like you're trying to figure out what I am." "I'm trying to figure out what I am," he said. "I thought I was asking for a wife. I think I hired a general." Something crossed her face, not quite amusement. Something quieter. Something that appreciated the recognition without quite being comfortable with it. "Call in your seasonal hands," she said. "And after breakfast, I need you to take me to the Northwater Gate." He set down his cup. "Why the gate?" "Because last night I went back through the original land grant documents. Roe left a copy here and there's a maintenance record clause in the original 1851 filing. If the primary water infrastructure has not been formally inspected and documented within the past calendar year, the investor board can classify it as deferred maintenance and use it as evidence of poor estate management." Caleb felt the cold that had nothing to do with the morning. "It hasn't been inspected." "I know. We have 11 days to commission a formal inspection, have it completed, and add the documentation to the operational record before the panel arrives." She was already moving toward the door. "Eat fast." He ate fast, and as he did across the table from a woman who had been his wife for exactly 1 day, Caleb Anderson felt the ground shift beneath him, not with the instability of something breaking, but with the particular lurch of something rearranging itself into a stronger configuration. He had spent 20 years building this ranch on the foundation of self-sufficiency. He had never once in all of that considered that a foundation could have more than one person standing on it. I was beginning to consider it now. Outside, the wind moved across the Montana plain. Somewhere to the north, Nathaniel Crow was regrouping. Somewhere in Helena Edmund Rowe was chasing a marriage announcement in an old newspaper archive. And inside Anderson Ranch, over a kitchen table, covered in maps and notes, and the early light of an October morning, something was being built that neither of them had planned for, something that did not yet have a name, and it was still taking shape when the first real test of it arrived. Not from Nathaniel Crow, not from a courtroom, but from a man Caleb had trusted for 11 years. It was Walt who came to find him, 3 days after the courthouse. Early morning before breakfast, while Lily was still going through the water inspection documentation at the kitchen table and the ranch was just beginning to move into the rhythm of the day, Walt found Caleb at the fence line on the east pasture, checking a repair. One of the hands had done the previous afternoon, and Walt stood beside him without speaking for long enough that Caleb knew from 30 years of knowing men who worked with their hands and rarely wasted words, that what was coming was not small. "Say it, Walt." Walt looked out at the pasture. "Briggs came to me last night. And he's been talking to some of the hands, the seasonal men too, when he rode out to confirm their early start." Walt paused. "There's a story going around." Caleb felt the thing in his chest that wasn't quite anger, something colder than anger, the feeling of a problem he should have anticipated but didn't. "What kind of story?" "That Mrs. Anderson isn't who she says she is." The fence post under Caleb's hand was solid oak driven 3 feet into Montana ground. He gripped it and said nothing. "Specifically," Walt continued low and careful, the way he delivered every difficult thing, "that she came to this town 6 weeks ago with a purpose. That she was asking questions about the ranch, about Crow, about the land dispute. That somebody in town told somebody in Crow's circle, and that circle has been circulating the idea that she was sent here." A pause. "Not that she came here on her own." Caleb turned his head. "Sent by who?" "That's where it gets complicated. The story changes depending on who's telling it. One version says she's working for a lawyer in Billings, who's building a case against land consolidation in the territory. Another version says she's working for Crow himself, that the whole marriage was a setup to get someone inside the ranch." The cold thing in Caleb's chest spread. "That's what Briggs believes." Briggs doesn't know what to believe. That's the problem. A man who doesn't know what to believe starts believing the worst thing available. Walt finally looked at him directly. "I'm not telling you this because I think it's true. I'm telling you because you need to know it exists." Caleb let go of the fence post. "How many men have heard it?" "All of them, by now." He walked back to the ranch house faster than he usually moved, which was how Walt knew watching him go that this was serious, in a way that went beyond operational concern. He came through the kitchen door, and Lily looked up from the table, immediately reading whatever was in his face with the speed of someone accustomed to reading rooms. "What happened?" He sat down across from her. Told her. All of it direct and clean, the way she had asked him to do things from the beginning. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Not the stillness of someone blindsided. The stillness of someone who has just been handed information they had considered as a possibility and was now reorganizing around the confirmation. "It's Crow," she said. "I know it's Crow. He can't win the legal fight right now, so he's trying to fracture the foundation here first. If the men stop trusting me, the ranch operation becomes unstable, and an unstable operation is exactly what he needs the assessment panel to find." She looked down at the papers in front of her. "He's smart, I'll give him that." "How did he know about you, about what you've been doing?" "Because I wasn't as invisible as I believed." She said it without self-pity, just factual disappointment aimed inward. 18 months of following one man's operation. At some point someone noticed. I should have accounted for that better. "Lily." "I'm not asking for reassurance." She cut in, not sharply but firmly. "I'm identifying a mistake so I don't repeat it." She looked up at him. "The question is, what we do about the story that's already in circulation. I tell my men the truth." "Which truth?" The question stopped him. Because there was more than one truth here, and he was only now understanding how they tangled. The truth that the marriage was arranged that would destroy the legal position if it reached the wrong ears. The truth that Lily had been tracking Crow for 18 months that would either make her look heroic or conspiratorial, depending on who was listening. The truth that she had records that was the most dangerous truth of all, because the moment Crow knew documentation existed, every calculation changed. "I tell them she's my wife," he said. "I tell them she's been helping secure the ranch against a legal attack. And I tell them that anyone who has a problem with that can come to me directly. And the story about me being sent by lawyers, or by Crow, I tell them it's exactly what it is. A lie designed to divide this operation from the inside." She looked at him steadily. "Can you make them believe that?" "I can make Walt believe it. Walt believes me, the rest follow." "Then talk to Walt today." "I already started." He held her gaze. "But Lily, there's something you need to understand. Those men out there, they've been loyal to this ranch for years. some of them since my father's time. If there's anything in this situation that could compromise their trust in me, anything I don't know about, I need to know it now, before it comes out from someone else." The sentence landed the way he intended it to, not as an accusation, but as the demand for complete honesty that their agreement had always required. She held his gaze for a long moment. "The lawyer in Billings," she said. "That part of the story isn't entirely wrong." His jaw tightened. "There is a lawyer," she continued. "His name is Arthur Vance. He's been compiling a federal case against land consolidation practices in 3 territories. I've been providing him with documentation for the past 8 months. He didn't send me here. I've been operating independently, but the connection exists." "Why didn't you tell me this?" "Because I was protecting Vance's case. If Crow finds out a federal case exists before Vance is ready to file, Crow has enough political connections to get it buried at the territorial level before it reaches a federal judge." She didn't break eye contact. "I'm telling you now because you need to know, and because I trust you more than I trust my own caution at this point." The last sentence, the quiet weight of it hit him somewhere behind the sternum. "Does Vance know you're married? I sent him a telegram yesterday." "What did it say?" "That my circumstances had changed and that the case timeline needed to accelerate." A pause. "I told him about the operational assessment." Caleb sat back in his chair. "And he responded this morning." She reached into the papers on the table and produced a folded telegram. "He wants to meet, here if possible. He says the Anderson Ranch documentation, if we can get the assessment panel on record, could be the anchor of his entire federal filing." Caleb took the telegram, read it. He set it down on the table between them. "If Vance comes here," he said, "and Crow finds out, Crow will know someone is building a federal case. Yes, that escalates everything. Dramatically. You understand that it doesn't stay a land dispute anymore. It becomes something that could get people hurt." "I understand." Her voice was very quiet. "I've understood that risk for 18 months. I've been carrying it alone." She looked at him directly. "I'm telling you now because you said you wanted to be in the same conversation. This is the conversation, Caleb. All of it." He looked at the telegram. He looked at the woman across the table from him, who had walked into his crisis with a crisis of her own, who had been operating in dangerous proximity to Nathaniel Crow for a year and a half, without anyone at her back, who had come to this town for her own reasons, and had chosen in the middle of her own mission to help him. "How long does Vance need to be ready to file?" he said. "He says 6 weeks minimum, 8 to be safe. The assessment panel arrives in 11 days. I know. If the assessment goes badly, it won't. Not arrogant, certain. The certainty of someone who has already planned for this and trusts the plan. The ranch is in good condition. We have 11 days to make it undeniable. The inspection documentation for the Watergate, I need that commission today. I'll send a hand to town this morning. Send Walt. He knows what to ask for, and he has credibility with the inspector. All right. And Caleb." She folded her hands on the table. "The story about me, the one Crow is circulating, it needs to stop spreading before the assessment. Not because it threatens me, but because a divided team is visible to an outside observer. If that panel walks in and senses friction among your men, they'll document it." He understood. "I'll talk to the men today, all of them together. Don't defend me," she said. "Don't explain me. Just tell them what you need from them and make clear that you stand behind your decisions. Those aren't the same thing. Defending me makes me a topic. Stating your position makes you a leader. There's a difference." He looked at her for a moment. Then he stood, picked up his hat from the hook beside the door and said, "I've been running this ranch for 20 years, and I never had a foreman as good as you." Howe was at the door before she responded. "You still don't," she said without looking up from her papers. "I'm your wife. The job pays better." He left the kitchen smiling, the first time in weeks that anything had made him do that. He talked to his men at noon in the yard, all of them gathered together with the directness that Walt had always appreciated and that the other hands had learned to expect. He told them the ranch was under attack. He told them the attack was legal, but that the people behind it were not above using other methods. He told them that his wife had identified vulnerabilities in the operation that he had missed, that she had helped them win the courthouse filing, and that she would be involved in preparing for the assessment panel. He told them that stories designed to divide a team were a weapon, and that the best way to defeat a weapon was to refuse to pick it up. Then he asked if anyone had questions. Tom Briggs raised a hand. What exactly does Mrs. Anderson's involvement look like going forward in terms of daily operations? She'll be working with Walt on the inspection documentation. She'll review the financial records with Roe when he comes out Thursday. Anything operational that affects our position with the panel, she has input. Caleb paused. That's going to be the answer to a lot of follow-up questions, Briggs. Save yourself the trouble of asking them one at a time. A beat of silence. Then almost reluctantly Briggs nodded. Walt said nothing. Walt's expression said he'd already made his peace with the situation and found it acceptable, which for these men was the same as an endorsement. The gathering broke. The hands went back to work. And in the kitchen, Lily, who had not been present, who had chosen not to be present, understanding exactly why, heard the sound of boots going back to their tasks and understood without being told that Caleb had handled it. She made a note on her map. Then she turned to the next page of her documentation, because there was still an enormous amount to do and 11 days was not a long time. Edmund Rowe arrived on Thursday with confirmation from Helena. He walked into the kitchen, set his bag on the table, and looked at Lily with the expression of a man who has stopped being surprised and started being impressed. Gerald Forsyth, he said. Married Nathaniel Crowe's sister, September 14, 1880. Ceremony performed in Helena. Witnessed by 3 members of the Territorial Governance Board, 2 of whom are current board members. He opened his bag and produced a sheet of paper. H. Alcott, Helena Gazette. Left column society page. Exactly where you said. Lily set down her pencil. The other board members. Do they know about the relationship? I asked my contact that specific question. The answer was no. One of them is a man named Patterson, Oliver Patterson, out of Missoula. He has a reputation for being genuinely independent. He was appointed before Crowe had the influence he has now. Patterson is our path, Lily said. Rowe looked at her. Patterson. If Patterson doesn't know about the Forsyth connection and we bring it to him directly privately before the assessment, he becomes either an ally or at minimum a disruption to Crowe's control of the panel. She turned to Caleb. Do you have any relationship with Patterson? I've met him twice, business years ago. We weren't close, but there was no bad blood. Does he know Crowe personally? Rowe answered. They've been in the same room at governance events. I don't believe they have a close relationship. Then I want to write Patterson a letter, Lily said. Before the assessment. Private correspondence disclosing the Forsyth conflict of interest and asking him to consider his position on the board. Rowe hesitated. If Crowe finds out we contacted Patterson, Crowe is going to be unhappy with us regardless. The question is whether Patterson knows the truth before he walks onto this property. She looked between them both. A man who doesn't know he's being used is dangerous. A man who does know is a choice. Caleb made the decision before Rowe finished weighing it. Write the letter, Lily. She was already reaching for paper. Rowe watched her. He had the look of a man revising a fundamental assumption. Mrs. Anderson, he said carefully. Can I ask you something directly? You can ask. What is your objective here, in the large sense? She looked up from the paper. My objective, she said, is to make sure that Nathaniel Crowe never does to another family what he did to mine, and what he's trying to do to this ranch. She held Rowe's gaze. The legal fight here is the most visible platform I've been close to. If Anderson Ranch stands, and if what happens here becomes part of a federal record, it makes every other case Crowe has built harder to defend. Rowe was very still. You're talking about a federal case. I'm talking about the beginning of one. That's Mrs. Anderson. That's considerably larger than a land dispute. I know what it is. She returned to the letter. That's why I've been working on it for 18 months. Rowe looked at Caleb. Caleb looked at Rowe. Something passed between them. The wordless acknowledgement of two men who have just understood simultaneously that the situation they thought they were managing is significantly larger than they realized. "She knows about Vance," Caleb said. "Vance." Roe went very still. "It's in Billings." "You know him," Lily said without looking up. "I know of him. He's been sniffing around territorial land records for the better part of 2 years. I thought he was building a private property case for a client." Roe sat down slowly. "He's building federal." "He's building federal," Lily confirmed. "And you've been supplying him with documentation." "For 8 months." Roe pressed both palms flat on the table. He was quiet for a long time. Then, "How close is he?" "6 weeks from filing. 8 if he wants to be safe. And the assessment panel arrives in 11 days. "Which is why," Lily said, looking up at last, "the assessment needs to go well, not just well perfectly, because a federal filing built partly around Anderson Ranch as a case study needs Anderson Ranch to be unimpeachable." Roe stared at her. Then he did something Caleb had never in 20 years of working with the man seen Edmund Roe do. He laughed. Not a polite laugh. A real one, short and astonished and completely involuntary. "Mr. Anderson," he said, "when you walked into Harlan's store looking for a wife, I want you to know that this is not what I imagined." "It isn't what I imagined either," Caleb said. From across the table, not looking up from the letter she was writing, Lily said, "Are you two finished?" They were. Ta-ta. The letter to Oliver Patterson was dispatched that evening. 2 days later, the North Water Gate inspection was completed, documented and signed by a certified territorial infrastructure assessor. A meticulous man named Hendricks, who spent 4 hours on the property and left with the careful satisfaction of someone who had found everything in better order than expected. Lily had spent those 4 hours walking beside him, answering his questions before he finished asking them and making sure that every answer was not only accurate, but in the exact language that would read best in an official document. Hendricks, getting back on his horse to leave, looked back at her and said, "Mrs. Anderson, in 14 years of doing this work, I have never had a property representative who understood what I was looking for before I asked." "Is that a problem?" Lily said. "It's a pleasure," he said. "That's rarer." She watched him ride out. Then she turned back to the ranch, and there was Caleb standing near the fence, having heard the exchange. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. There was a quality to the silence between them lately. Not the careful silence of two people navigating an arrangement, but the easier silence of people who have begun to understand each other's rhythms. It was a small change. It was not a small thing. On the 6th day after the courthouse at 7 in the evening, Lily went to her room, the spare room adjacent to Caleb's, which had been the arrangement from the beginning, practical and clearly understood by both of them, and she did not come out for dinner. Caleb waited 30 minutes. Then he knocked. No answer. He knocked again, less politely. "Lily." A pause. Then, "I'm fine." "That's not what I asked." Another pause. "I'm not hungry." "That's also not what I asked." The door opened. She had been crying not recently, but within the last hour he could see it in the residual tension around her eyes, the controlled quality of her face that meant she was working to present something other than what had just been happening. He had not expected this. Not because he thought she was incapable of it, but because she had been so relentlessly forward-moving for 6 days that he had stopped accounting for the weight she was carrying beneath the motion. "What happened?" he said. She stepped back from the door. He came in, and she sat on the edge of the bed, and he sat in the chair by the window, and neither of them pretended she was fine. "I got a letter today," she said, "from a woman in Wyoming. Her name is Clara Hensley. She was a neighbor of my father's." He waited. "My father died," she said. 3 months ago. I didn't know." The room was very quiet. "Clara didn't have an address for me. She wrote to the last town she knew I'd been in, and it took time for the letter to reach me." She had her hands folded in her lap, the composed position, the deliberate hold on herself. "He was alone at the end. He had been alone for 2 years by then. After he lost the property, he never—" She stopped. "He never found a way back from it." Caleb said nothing. He understood from long experience with grief, from sitting in chairs beside empty places, that silence was often more honest than comfort. I told myself I was doing this for him, she said. Building the case, following Crow. I told myself that if I could stop Crow from doing it to someone else, that was a way of... She stopped again. That it meant something. That the loss meant something. It does mean something, I know. She looked at him. But he's gone. And I found out while I was writing a letter to a governance board member and reviewing Watergate inspection documents and planning how to present a ranch to a panel of strangers, and I didn't have time to... She stopped. I didn't let myself stop. Stop now, he said. There's still so much to... Lily. His voice was quiet but absolute. Stop. Right now. Everything else waits. She looked at him. He looked back, and something that had been held very tightly for how long he couldn't know, but clearly longer than 6 days, longer than the courthouse, longer than Montana, came loose. She didn't collapse. That wasn't who she was. But she stopped holding herself at attention, and in the relaxation of that posture was something more honest than anything she had yet shown him. Grief. Real grief. The kind that doesn't announce itself, but sits quietly in the body until the body finally insists on being listened to. He stayed. I didn't fill the silence with assurances or questions or practical suggestions. He sat in the chair by the window, and he let her grieve her father in the way she was able to grieve him. Quietly controlled the tears moving down her face without drama, while her hands stayed folded in her lap, and the evening settled into dark around them. After a long time she said, I'm sorry. Don't be. This isn't... It's human, he said. It's completely human. Don't apologize for it. She was quiet for another long moment. Then, he would have liked you. Caleb hadn't expected that. He felt it land somewhere it had no right to go so quickly. Why? Because you don't fill silence with noise. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, a simple, unself-conscious gesture that was somehow more intimate than anything else he'd seen from her. He was a quiet man. He thought before he spoke. He believed that land was something you held in trust, not something you owned. A pause. He said that a lot. Toward the end, when the ranch was going. He said, Lily, the land was always bigger than us. We just forgot it for a while. Caleb thought about his father. About sitting in this same room, in this same chair years ago. About the particular shape of the absence apparent leaves. My father said something similar, he said. Not in those words. He wasn't much for philosophical language. But he used to walk the perimeter of this property every spring, and he'd stop in the same spot near the North Water Gate of all places and just stand there for a minute. And when I asked him once what he was doing, he said, remembering that it was here before me, and it'll be here after. Lily looked at him. Her eyes were still wet. Something in them had shifted, a softness that had not been there before, or that had been there and carefully blocked. You're going to keep it, she said. Yes. Even if yes. No hesitation. Whatever Crow does next, whatever the assessment finds, this ranch stays in this family. She nodded slowly. Then let's make sure the assessment finds nothing he can use. Back to the work. Back to the forward motion. But gentler now, something in the line of her shoulders, different. The posture, not of someone performing composure, but of someone who had let something go, and was lighter for it. Tomorrow, he said. Tonight you eat something and you sleep. I'm not... Lily. She met his eyes. Tomorrow, he said again. A pause. Then, all right. He stood. Moved toward the door. Then stopped because there was something he wanted to say, and he was not, as he had told her, a man who said things easily. What you're doing for this ranch, he said, not turning around. What you've been doing for 18 months for your father, I want you to know that I see it. Not as a strategy, as something a person chose to do when they didn't have to. He heard her inhale behind him. That matters to me, he said. He left the room before she could answer. He wasn't sure later whether that was bravery or cowardice. He thought it might be both. On the 8th day, the reply from Oliver Patterson arrived. Caleb brought it to the kitchen where Lily was with Walt going through the seasonal hand assignments. She took the letter, read it, and set it down on the table with the same careful, deliberate motion he was coming to recognize as her way of managing news that had significant weight. "Well," Caleb said. "He's concerned," she said. "He says he was not aware of the Forsyth relationship. He says he takes conflicts of interest seriously." She picked the letter back up, read a specific line again. "He says, and this is the part that matters, that he intends to review the composition of the panel before the assessment proceeds." Walt, who had been listening, said, "What does that mean?" "It means," Lily said, "that Patterson is honest enough to be troubled by what we told him, and careful enough not to show his hand before he's decided how to play it." "Is that good or bad?" Walt said. "It's good," Caleb said. "An honest man who doesn't know what to do yet is better than a dishonest man who does." Lily nodded. "But we can't count on Patterson alone. The assessment still needs to be airtight." She looked at Walt. "The seasonal hands arrive tomorrow, first 4 by noon. I want them briefed on the assessment before they start any other work. What to say if they're asked questions, what not to volunteer, how to present the operation professionally." She turned to Caleb. "Is that reasonable?" "It's reasonable," Caleb said. Walt looked between them, the particular look of a man who has watched something change and is quietly deciding whether the change is good. Then he nodded once and walked out. When he was gone, Caleb picked up Patterson's letter and read it again. "Crow doesn't know about Patterson," he said. "Not yet. When he finds out we contacted him, he's going to accelerate again." She had already thought of this. He could see it in the way she said it, the absence of alarm. "Which means he may try something before the panel arrives. Something to destabilize the ranch enough that the assessment finds what he needs it to find." "Like what?" "I don't know yet," she said. "But I know how he thinks. He won't do anything obvious. He'll do something that looks like an accident or a coincidence or a natural problem. Something that creates a visible difficulty on this property in the days before the panel walks through that gate." "The water gate," Caleb said. "The water gate," she agreed. "It's the most vulnerable infrastructure and the most legally significant. If something happened to it, I'll put a man on it overnight. 2 men, she said. And they need to be men you trust completely. Not new hands. Not seasonal." "Walt and Martinez," he said immediately. "Tell them tonight. Don't explain in front of the others. Just tell them directly." She paused. "And Caleb." He looked at her. "Tell them to be careful," she said. "Crow's people don't come in the front door." The sentence sat in the room between them, not frightening exactly, but weighted with the particular gravity of someone who has been close enough to Nathaniel Crow's methods to know what they look like from the inside. Caleb thought about a woman alone for 18 months, tracking a dangerous man's operations through 3 territories, carrying records that could put her in real danger if the wrong person found out they existed. I thought about the fact that she had come to this town for her father, and had ended up in the middle of his fight, and had fought it as hard as if it were her own. Because it was. Because this was how she was built, not toward retreat, not toward safety, but toward the thing that needed to be done, regardless of the cost to herself. "I'll tell Walt tonight," he said. She nodded and turned back to her papers, and outside the Montana wind moved across the land. The same wind, the same plain, the same cold. October pressing down on the same old grass, but something inside the walls of Anderson Ranch had shifted. Not the legal situation, not the operational readiness. Something less definable and more permanent. 2 people who had come into this arrangement as strangers, each carrying private damage, private missions, private walls built from private losses, had spent 8 days letting the walls develop small cracks. Not because they decided to, because the pressure of what they were surviving together had done what pressure always does to structures that are strong but not infinite. It had found the seams and light had come through. But light, as anyone who has lived through a Montana winter knows, does not arrive without first making the darkness more visible by contrast, and what the 9th day revealed was darker than either of them had prepared for. It started before dawn. Walt's voice outside the window, low, urgent, controlled in the way that men who have spent their lives managing emergencies learn to control their voices when something is genuinely wrong. Caleb was dressed and out the door in under 2 minutes. Lily was 1 minute behind him. Walt was standing at the edge of the yard with Martinez, and between them was something that stopped Caleb cold before he reached them. A length of iron chain, the kind used on heavy gate mechanisms, cut clean through at one end. Not broken, not rusted through. Cut. Deliberately, precisely, by someone who knew exactly what they were cutting and why. "The north gate," Caleb said. "Still standing," Walt said immediately. "Martinez found this at 3 in the morning on the perimeter path. Whoever did it didn't get to the gate itself. We think they heard Martinez coming and pulled back." "You think?" "I know," Martinez said quietly. He was a compact man, mid-30s, with the careful manner of someone who grew up being underestimated and learned to let the underestimation work for him. "I saw 2 men on the ridge. They had the chain with them when they came in. They didn't have it when they left. They dropped it." Lily had moved up beside Caleb without either man noticing, which said something about how naturally she had begun to fit into the operational rhythm of the ranch. "Dropped it and ran," Martinez said. "Fast. They had horses waiting past the tree line on the east side. You couldn't identify them. Dark. Too far. But one of them had a gray horse, distinctive gait, something wrong with the right rear leg. Slight hitch. I'd know that horse if I saw it again." Lily looked at Caleb. Caleb looked at the chain. "Crow accelerated," she said. "Faster than I expected." He picked up the chain, turned it over in his hands. The cut was clean, a professional tool done by someone who knew how to use it. "He's not sending messengers anymore. He's sending a message anyway." She turned to Walt. "Nothing goes to town today. No hands leave the property without telling you first. And I need someone I can trust at the gate all day, not just overnight." Walt looked at Caleb. Caleb nodded. "Briggs," Walt said. Lily blinked. "Briggs. Tom Briggs is the best man I have for holding a position under pressure," Walt said. "Whatever his opinions are, when Caleb gives him a job, he does it. Full stop." Lily absorbed this. "All right," she said. "Briggs at the gate." She turned and walked back toward the house, and Caleb followed her, and neither of them said what they were both thinking until the door closed behind them. "The assessment is in 3 days," Caleb said. "I know. If they try again tonight, they won't try the same way twice." She was already at the table pulling out her papers. "They know we have people watching. The direct approach failed. Crow is going to try something subtler." "What does subtle look like for a man who just sent 2 people to cut a Watergate chain in the middle of the night?" She looked up. "It looks like something that happens inside the house, not outside it." He stared at her. "Information," she said. "Documentation. The records. Rowe has the inspection report, the financial books. If something happened to that paperwork before the assessment. Rowe keeps copies in his office in town. Does he keep them locked? He has a safe. Who else knows the combination?" Caleb opened his mouth, then closed it. Because the honest answer was that he didn't know the full answer, and in this context, not knowing was the same as a vulnerability. "I'll send word to Rowe this morning," he said. "He moves everything to the bank vault until after the assessment." "Today," she said. "Not this morning. Right now." He sent Martinez to town before sunrise. Rowe arrived at the ranch by 10, pale and slightly breathless, with a leather case that he held with both hands, the way men hold things that have become more valuable overnight. He sat down at the kitchen table and told them what Martinez had found when he arrived in town. Rowe's office had been entered, not broken into, entered, professionally. The lock on the back door had been picked so cleanly that Rowe's assistant, arriving at 7 in the morning, hadn't noticed anything wrong until she went to file a document and found that the filing cabinet had been opened and the contents gone through. "What's missing?" Caleb said. "That's the thing." Rowe set the leather case on the table. "I can't find anything missing. Everything is still there. The Anderson land grant copies, the financial records, the inspection documentation, all of it." "They were looking for something specific," Lily said. Something they didn't find. Roe looked at her. What would they be looking for? She was quiet for a moment. Then, me. Both men looked at her. My documentation, she said. The records I've been building on Crow for 18 months. They know I have something, or they suspect it. Crow's circle has been aware of me for longer than I realized. They went through Roe's files looking for whatever I might have passed to him. You haven't passed anything to me, Roe said. I know, but they don't know that. She sat back. Which means they're scared. You don't break into a lawyer's office in a town where everyone knows your face unless you're scared of what that lawyer might be holding. Or unless you're confident no one can touch you, Caleb said. The room went quiet with that. Because both things were true and both were dangerous. Where are your records? Caleb asked. He had asked her this before. She had said somewhere safe. Now 3 days before the assessment, and with Crow's people breaking into offices somewhere safe, needed to be more specific. She looked at him for a moment. Then she stood up, excused herself, and came back 4 minutes later with a flat leather portfolio that she set on the table between them. This is a copy, she said. The originals are in Arthur Vance's possession in Billings. I've been carrying this set separately in case something happened to his. She opened it. The documentation inside was meticulous, organized by date, by transaction type, by geographic location. Land transfers, payment records, board appointment, logs, political contribution statements, correspondence between Crow's associates and territorial officials. Cross-referenced. Annotated in Lily's small, precise handwriting with context and sourcing for each item. Roe picked up the first page. Read it. Turn to the second. He didn't put it down for 10 minutes. When he finally looked it up, his face had the particular quality of a man who has just understood the actual size of what he's been standing next to. This is enough, he said. If this reaches a federal judge, this is enough to open a full federal investigation into every land transaction Crow has conducted in the past 5 years. That's the point, Lily said. Vance needs to file, Roe said. He needs to file now, not in 6 weeks, not in 8. He's not ready. He needs to get ready. Roe set the papers down. Because if Crow's people are looking for this documentation, and they know it exists every day, Vance waits a day. Crow has to find another way to stop it. Lily looked at this portfolio. I can send word to Vance today. But if he files before he's fully prepared, Crow's lawyers will find the gaps in the case and use them to get it dismissed. And if he waits and Crow buries the documentation first, there's no case at all. Roe turned to Caleb. Mr. Anderson, this is no longer about your ranch. It's been more than my ranch for a while, Caleb said. He looked at Lily. She looked back. Send word to Vance, he said. Tell him what happened this morning. Tell him about the assessment about Patterson, about Roe's office. Tell him everything and let him decide. If he decides to file, then we deal with what comes next, Caleb said. We've been dealing with what comes next for 11 days. We're still standing. Something in her face responded to that, not just the words but the steadiness behind them. The complete absence of panic in a man who was standing in the middle of a situation that had expanded far beyond what he'd walked into. She reached for paper. She started writing. The telegram to Vance went out at noon. The reply came back at 4:30. Lily read it at the kitchen table with Caleb across from her, and Roe standing by the window, and when she set it down, her face had the controlled expression of someone managing the emotional response to something significant. He's filing, she said. Friday, 2 days after the assessment. Roe exhaled. That's not enough time to... He says he has enough, she said. He's been working faster than he told me. The Forsyth connection when I sent him Patterson's letter last week, he was able to use it to corroborate 2 other relationships on the board. He says the filing is stronger than he expected it to be 3 weeks ago. Friday, Caleb said. The assessment is Thursday. I know. So Crow has 2 days after Thursday to find out if federal filing is coming. And if he finds out before it's filed, he'll do everything he can to stop it, Lily said. Which means Thursday is the most important day. If the assessment goes well, Crow has no remaining local legal mechanism against this ranch. And when Vance files Friday, the federal process takes over, and everything Crow has been doing in this territory becomes subject to federal scrutiny. It ends, Caleb said. It ends, she confirmed. A beat of silence. Then Walt, who had been standing in the doorway long enough to have heard most of it, said simply, "Tell me what you need for Thursday." The 2 days before the assessment were the most concentrated work Caleb had done in his life, and he had spent his life doing concentrated work. Every system on the ranch was reviewed, documented, and presented in the most accurate and favorable true light possible. The word true mattered to both of them. Neither pushed for misrepresentation, neither suggested anything fabricated. The ranch was in genuinely good condition, had genuinely strong financial records, was genuinely well managed by men who knew their work. The task was to make what was true undeniable. Lily moved through those 2 days with a focused efficiency that reminded Caleb of watching a skilled craftsman work. Each action, purposeful. Nothing wasted, the accumulated small choices building toward something that would either hold weight or it wouldn't. She also spent time with the men, not managing them, not performing. She simply showed up where work was being done and was present in a way that asked nothing and offered something, a question that showed she understood what they were doing. A suggestion delivered as a question rather than a directive. The occasional moment of dry humor that surprised people into responding. Tom Briggs found her at the fence line on the second afternoon, noting something in a small book. He stopped beside her. "You're documenting the fence inspection records," he said. "For the panel," she said. "They'll want to see evidence of routine maintenance. We do maintain the fences." "I know. That's why I'm writing it down." He was quiet for a moment. "You don't have to explain yourself to me, Mrs. Anderson." "I know that too." Another pause. Then, with the particular difficulty of a man for whom honesty sometimes requires working against his own grain. "I said some things about you, to the other men, early on." She kept writing. "I've since said different things," he said. She looked up. "Tom." "Ma'am." "Do your job Thursday, and I'll do mine. That's all either of us needs." He nodded, turned to go. "Ann Briggs." She waited until he turned back. "Thank you for what you said to them. The second time." He looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded again, a different nod, the acknowledgement of something real, and walked away. She watched him go. Then she turned back to her notes, and her pen kept moving, and the fence line stayed quiet around her, and she thought about her father standing on his land in Wyoming in the last good year before everything unraveled, and she made herself a promise she intended to keep. Wednesday night, Caleb couldn't sleep. He was sitting at the kitchen table at 2 a.m. with coffee he wasn't drinking when Lily appeared in the doorway. She looked at him, looked at the coffee, sat down across from him without asking whether he wanted company. She understood by now that he wasn't a man who asked for things he needed. He was a man who stayed still and hoped someone would notice. She had noticed. "The assessment," he said. "Will go well," she said. "You don't know that." "No, but I've made it as likely as 2 people and a good team can make it." She reached across the table and took his coffee without asking, and took a sip. Grimaced slightly because it was cold, and set it back. "What are you actually afraid of?" He looked at her. "Not the assessment," she said. "What are you actually afraid of?" He was quiet for a long moment. "That it's not enough," he said. "That we do everything right, and it's still not enough. That Crow has a move I haven't seen, and Vance is 1 step behind him, and on Friday morning I wake up to something I can't come back from." She listened to all of it. "I know that fear," she said. "I've been living inside it for 18 months. A pause. "I can't promise you it'll be enough. No one can promise that. What I can tell you is that we've done everything available to us, and the people in our corner are honest, and Crow's people are not, and that asymmetry matters. It doesn't always win. No, it doesn't always win." She met his eyes. "But it means that whatever happens, we were on the right side of it. And that your father's land, whatever happens, was defended by people who deserved to defend it." He looked at her across the table. There were a dozen things he could have said. He was not a man who said the dozen things. "Go to sleep, Lily," he said. You first, she said. He almost smiled. That's not how it works. It is tonight. She stood up. I'll sit here. You go sleep. 4 hours minimum, you need to be sharp tomorrow. You don't need to. Caleb. Her voice was steady and final, and somehow entirely gentle at the same time. Go to sleep. He went. He didn't know. Lying in the dark of his room, whether to be grateful or undone by the fact that someone had told him to go to sleep and he had simply gone. That it had felt natural. That the kitchen with her in it had felt like a place where it was safe to leave the vigil. He thought about that for approximately 4 minutes. Then he slept. Thursday morning arrived with the particular clarity of a day that intends to be significant. The assessment panel rode onto Anderson Ranch at 9 o'clock precisely. 3 men. Caleb met them at the gate with Walt beside him. Lily stood 2 steps back, not behind him, not forward. Beside him and slightly back in the way of someone who understands exactly where she belongs in this particular moment and has chosen it deliberately. Caleb knew 2 of the 3 men, the standard-appointed assessor's men he'd seen at territorial events over the years. Professional business, like the kind of men who do their job and collect their fee and don't look too hard at who hired them. The 3rd man was Oliver Patterson. Caleb recognized him from years ago, a tall man, gray at the temples, with the careful eyes of someone who reads situations before he reads documents. Patterson looked at Caleb. Then he looked at Lily. He nodded to her once. She nodded back. Nothing was said. Nothing needed to be. The assessment began. They walked every section of the property. They reviewed the financial documentation that Rowe presented with the organized precision of a man who had spent 3 days preparing to answer any question from any angle. They examined the Watergate inspection report. They spoke to Martinez, to 2 of the seasonal hands who had arrived and who answered questions about the operation with the direct, knowledgeable confidence of men who actually knew what they were doing. Lily stayed close throughout, not interjecting, not performing, but present and available when a question arose that went beyond operations and into the legal or financial documentation she knew better than anyone. At one point, the younger of the 2 standard assessors asked about the timeline of the Watergate inspection. Rowe started to answer. Lily answered instead calmly, specifically, with dates and the assessor's name and the document number and the exact legal clause it satisfied. The assessor blinked. Patterson, standing slightly behind him, made a note. It took 4 hours. At 1 in the afternoon, the panel reconvened near the main gate to confer. Caleb stood with Walt and Lily and Rowe, and they did not speak because there was nothing left to say. Either it was enough or it wasn't. The younger assessor said something to Patterson. Patterson listened, said something back. The second assessor said something. Patterson listened again. Then Patterson separated himself from the other 2 and walked toward Caleb. Mr. Anderson. He stopped in front of them. His eyes moved to Lily briefly, a look of clear and unperformed respect. Mrs. Anderson. Mr. Patterson, Caleb said. I'll tell you directly because I believe you prefer that. Patterson's voice was low even. This operation is well run. The documentation is thorough. The financial position is sound. There is nothing here that constitutes mismanagement or instability. Caleb breathed. I will be submitting a report that reflects exactly that, Patterson continued. You should know that I will also be submitting a separate statement to the Territorial Governance Office regarding the composition of this panel and a conflict of interest that should have disqualified 1 member. A pause. That process may take some time, but it will be completed. Thank you, Caleb said. Patterson looked at him steadily. Don't thank me. I'm doing my job. That's all. He started to turn away, then stopped. Mrs. Anderson, the letter you sent, the specificity of it. He paused, choosing his words. It's rare to receive information like that from someone who clearly understood what they were looking at. My father taught me to read documents carefully, Lily said. He taught you well. Patterson returned to his colleagues. The 3 men spoke briefly, mounted their horses, and rode out through the gate. Walt, watching them go, said absolutely nothing. Martinez said, well. Roe sat down on a fence post like his legs had decided they'd done enough. Caleb turned to Lily. She was watching the road where the panel had disappeared. Her arms were at her sides. Her face had the quality of a person who has been holding something for a very long time and is only now beginning to understand they're allowed to put it down. "It worked," Caleb said. She turned to look at him. "The ranch is safe," he said. She nodded once. "For now." "For now is enough." He held her gaze. "One day at a time, Lily. That's how this works." Something in her face. The last layer of the performance, the final professional composure shifted. Not broke. Shifted. The way light shifts when a cloud moves and the thing it was falling on becomes suddenly unexpectedly clear. "Your father would have been proud of this place," she said. He felt that in a way he hadn't expected and wasn't entirely prepared for. "So would yours," he said. She held his gaze for a moment longer. Then she turned toward the house. "I need to send a telegram to Vance," she said. "The assessment is clean. He files tomorrow." She walked away, and Caleb watched her go, and Walt came to stand beside him. They stood there together in the afternoon quiet of the ranch that had been in the Anderson family since 1851. And Walt said in the tone of a man who has been observing things carefully for several weeks and has arrived at a considered conclusion, "I owe Harlan an apology." Caleb looked at him. "I told him about a week ago that you'd lost your mind walking into his store looking for a wife." Walt watched Lily disappear through the kitchen door. "I was wrong." "You were working with the available information," Caleb said. "I was." Walt paused. "Where'd you find a woman like that?" Caleb thought about an alley behind a milliner's building, about a broken wheel and a piece of wire, and a woman who didn't look up until she was ready to. "She found me," he said. Walt absorbed this with a slow nod. Then he turned and walked back toward the barn, because the assessment was over and the work was not, and that was the nature of things. Friday came. Caleb was at the table when Lily came downstairs, and she was moving differently, not faster, not with more energy, but with the particular quality of someone who has been carrying something for a very long time and has just understood that today is the day they set it down. She sat across from him. He pushed a cup of coffee toward her. She took it. "Vance files this morning," she said. "I know. If the filing holds, it'll hold." "You don't know that." "No," he said. "But I know Vance has had 18 months of your work to build on, and I know that's not nothing." He held her gaze. "It's not nothing, Lily." She wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. "After this," she said. "After the federal case, after whatever comes next." She stopped, started again. "What does this look like, the ranch? Us?" She said the word carefully without drama. "The agreement we made." He looked at her across the table. I thought about what he'd been thinking about for 11 days. The thing that had been taking shape in the back of his mind while everything else demanded his attention. The name he hadn't been able to give it until now, sitting in this kitchen in the early morning of the day, everything might finally change. "It looks like whatever you want it to be," he said. "That's not an answer. It's the only honest one I have right now." He leaned forward slightly. "But I'll tell you this. When I walked into that courtroom, I told you I wasn't thinking about the ranch." "I remember. I've been thinking about that since, about why." He paused. Not for effect, because the words needed to be right, and he was a man who did not have many of them, and needed the ones he chose to carry exactly what he meant. "I think it's because somewhere in the past 11 days, this stopped being about the ranch." She looked at him. "For me," he said. "It stopped being about the ranch for me." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside the ranch was beginning to wake the sounds of men and animals, and the vast Montana morning moving through its ordinary motions, indifferent and enormous and beautiful, in the way that enormous things are beautiful when you are still alive and standing inside them. Lily looked at Caleb Anderson across a table covered in the remnants of 11 days of fighting documents, maps, telegrams, coffee cups, and she said nothing for a long time. Then she said, "Ask me again, when this is over." "Ask you what?" "Whatever you're building up to," she said. "Ask me then." He looked at her. "All right," he said. "All right," she said. And they sat together in the early morning quiet of the ranch that was still standing, waiting for a telegram from Billings that would either end something or begin it. And the light came through the kitchen window, the way it always had and always would, slow and golden, and completely indifferent to the small, urgent, irreversible things happening in the people beneath it. Neither of them spoke again for a long time. Neither of them needed to. Neither of them needed to speak, and they sat like that in the early morning quiet of the ranch that was still standing until the telegram arrived at 9:30 and changed the final shape of everything. Martinez brought it from town at a hard ride, which told Caleb before he even read it that the news was significant enough that someone had decided speed mattered more than composure. He took it at the door. Lily was already standing behind him, not hovering, just present the way she was present for everything, now close enough to matter and far enough to give him room. He read it. He read it again. Then he turned and held it out to her without a word. She read it. Her eyes moved quickly, steadily, line by line. When she reached the end, she stopped, stayed still for a moment with the telegram in her hands and her gaze fixed on the last line, and Caleb watched her absorb something that was he understood watching her. The culmination of 18 months of solitary work and grief and forward motion that had never once permitted itself to stop. Arthur Vance had filed. Federal Court, Billings, Montana Territory. Friday morning as promised. The filing cited land manipulation of territorial governance boards, undisclosed conflicts of interest and coercion of land transfer across 4 counties. Attached to the filing as primary documentation, 18 months of records compiled by Lily Bennett Anderson, cross-referenced and corroborated by Vance's independent research. The filing named Nathaniel Crow by name. It named Gerald Forsyth. It named 2 territorial board members and 1 judge. And at the bottom of Vance's telegram, in the clipped language of a man who did not waste words on sentiment, but understood when sentiment was warranted, were 4 words that Lily read 3 times before she lowered the paper. Your father would know. She set the telegram on the table. She pressed her palms flat against the surface and looked at her own hands for a long moment. Caleb said nothing. He simply stayed. When she looked up, her eyes were clear. Not the clarity of someone who hasn't been moved, but the clarity of someone who has moved through something and come out the other side still standing. It's filed, she said. It's filed, he confirmed. He used all of it. Everything I sent him. Every piece. She breathed in, breathed out. It's not over. Federal cases take time. Crow will fight it. He will. He has lawyers who are better funded than Vance. He does. This could take years. It could. Caleb looked at her steadily. But the filing exists. It's in federal record. Whatever Crow does now, he does it under federal scrutiny. That changes every calculation he makes from this point forward. She understood what he was saying. Not that the fight was finished, but that the nature of it had shifted irrevocably in a direction that favored the truth over the machinery that had been hiding it. Send word to Roe, she said. Already planning to. And Walt needs to know. The men should hear it from someone they trust before it circulates through town as rumor. I'll tell them at noon. She nodded, looked back at her hands. Then quietly, as if the words were something she had been carrying for a long time and was only now allowing herself to set down, we did it. You did it, Caleb said. She shook her head. We. He looked at her across the table. We, he agreed. The news reached town by afternoon. In the particular way of small Montana towns in 1882, where information moved faster than horses when it wanted to. The federal filing was known in Harlan's general store by 2 o'clock, in the saloon by 3, and in the parlor of every house on the main street by supper. Nathaniel Crow, who had an office above the bank, was seen leaving town at 4:30 with 2 of his lawyers and a significant quantity of luggage, which told the town everything it needed to know about his confidence in his legal position. Harlan sent a note to the ranch. It said simply, Crow left. Thought you should know. H. Walt read it aloud in the yard to the assembled hands, and there was a moment of quiet that preceded the kind of reaction that men who work hard and don't complain give when something genuinely good happens. Brief, understated, real. Martinez said, "Good riddance." Briggs said nothing, but he nodded with the slow, certain nod of a man whose instinct about something has been confirmed in the best possible way. Walt folded the note and put it in his shirt pocket. "Back to work," he said. They went back to work. Roe arrived at the ranch the following morning with a face that had finally, after 3 weeks of sustained tension, settled into something approaching peace. He sat at the kitchen table with Caleb and Lily and a fresh pot of coffee, and walked them through the legal implications of the federal filing with the methodical care of a man who has spent 40 years making sure people understand exactly where they stand. The land grant was secure. The Stability Clause challenge was formally closed. The operational assessment had produced a clean report. Patterson's official submission had arrived that morning, documenting the ranch's sound management and financial health with the precision of a man who understood that documentation was itself a form of protection. And the federal filing, Roe explained, had triggered an automatic review of all pending territorial land disputes, in which Crow Investments held an interest, which meant that the 2 ranches in the valley that had been under pressure from Crow's legal team for the past year were now protected under federal review proceedings. "Other families," Lily said. 3 other properties, Roe confirmed. 2 in this county, 1 in the next. They've been living with the same kind of pressure you've been under for the past months. The federal review suspends all action against them until the case is resolved. Lily was quiet for a moment. Then, "I want to write to them." Both men looked at her. "The other families," she said. "I want them to know what happened here. Not the legal details, Vance can send those. I want them to know that the documentation existed, that it was built over time, and that it worked." She paused. I want them to know it's possible to fight back." Roe looked at Caleb. Caleb was already looking at Lily with the expression he had been wearing more and more frequently over the past 2 weeks. The particular quality of attention a man gives something he has not yet named, but is no longer uncertain about. "Write the letters," he said. She reached for paper. Roe watched her for a moment. Then he looked at Caleb and said in a low voice, with the tone of a man delivering a verdict, "He's been deliberating for some time. Where in God's name did you find this woman?" "Harlan," Caleb said. Roe stared at him. "He pointed me in the right direction," Caleb said. "The rest was her." 2 weeks passed. The federal case moved through its early stages with the grinding, deliberate pace of federal processes, but it moved, which was the important thing. Vance sent updates every few days, each one indicating that the documentation Lily had built was holding up under Crow's legal challenges, that the corroborating records Roe had contributed were strengthening the case, and that the federal judge assigned had a reputation for impartiality that made Crow's usual methods of influence significantly less effective. Patterson submitted his conflict of interest statement to the Territorial Governance Office. Forsyth was removed from the investor board pending investigation. 2 other board members requested voluntary recusal. The board, suddenly composed primarily of people Crow did not control, ceased to be a mechanism he could use. The watcher at the ridge above the Northwater Gate had not reappeared. Crow's office above the bank remained empty. The valley, which had spent 4 years quietly contracting under the pressure of one man's systematic acquisition, began slowly, tentatively to breathe again. And inside Anderson Ranch, something else was happening. Something slower and quieter and more significant than any of the legal developments, though it had been building at the same pace and with the same inevitability. Caleb and Lily had settled into a life, not the arrangement they had agreed to. Not the performance of stability they had presented to the courthouse. Something real, organic, unplanned, assembled from the accumulated texture of shared mornings and working meals and late-night problem-solving, and the particular intimacy of 2 people who have been through something difficult together and chosen repeatedly not to pretend it was easy. She had moved from the spare room without either of them making a decision about it. It had happened the way things happen between people who have stopped performing their boundaries and started living inside them, gradually, then completely, then obviously. She knew where he kept the good coffee, and he knew she didn't drink it until she'd been awake for 30 minutes. He knew she thought best with a pencil in her hand, and she knew he needed silence in the early morning, the way other people needed food. She had learned the rhythm of the ranch's seasons, and he had learned that she processed worry by working and grief by going still, and anger by being extremely precise in her language. Walt noticed and said nothing, which was the highest form of approval he possessed. Briggs noticed and said to Martinez privately that he'd been wrong about a few things, which for Tom Briggs was the equivalent of a public apology and a standing ovation. Martinez noticed and smiled, which was the only response the situation required. It was on a Tuesday evening in November, 6 weeks after the courthouse, 4 weeks after the federal filing with the first real cold of the season, pressing against the windows, that Caleb said the thing he had been building toward since the morning in the kitchen when she had told him to ask her later. They were at the table after supper. She had her notes in front of her correspondence with Vance with the other families she had written to, with a woman in Billings who had reached out after hearing about the federal case and wanted to understand how documentation of this kind could be built. Caleb had the ranch accounts which he now reviewed monthly, as she had insisted, and which were in the kind of meticulous order they had never been in before. The lamp was burning between them. Outside, the wind was doing what Montana wind does in November, asserting itself. He set down the accounts. He looked at her. She was reading something, her pencil moving in the margin, her hair loose around her shoulders, the way it was every evening, and she was utterly absorbed and completely unaware of being watched. And he sat there for a moment, just looking at her with the calm, clear attention of someone who has stopped pretending they're looking at something else. "Lily," she looked up. "I told you I'd ask you something when this was over," he said. She set the pencil down. "It's not entirely over," she said. "The federal case will take—" "I know when the federal case will resolve," he said. "That's not what I mean by over." He held her gaze. "The part that was about survival is over. What's left is what we decide to do with what's still here." She was very still. "I told you in that courthouse that I wasn't thinking about the ranch when we walked in." He paused. Let the words sit where they needed to sit. "That was the first time I said something true to you that I didn't fully understand yet." She waited. "I understand it now," he said. "I wasn't thinking about the ranch because I was thinking about you, not about what you'd done, not about what you were contributing. About you." He stopped. Started again, because this was not the kind of territory he moved through easily, and he was doing it anyway because she deserved the honest version, not the abbreviated one. "About the fact that you were beside me, and I didn't want that to be temporary." The lamp burned between them. The wind pushed at the windows. "I'm not asking you to stay because of the arrangement," he said. "I'm not asking because the ranch needs a co-signatory, or because the legal situation is better with you here. I'm asking because this—" He gestured at the table between them, at the papers and the lamp and the 2 cups and the ordinary accumulated evidence of a shared life, "is what I want. Not as a strategy, as a life." Lily looked at him. For a long moment, she said nothing, and he let the silence be what it was. Not empty, not anxious, just the space a real answer requires before it arrives. "You asked me once," she said, "whether I would have stayed if you'd handled things differently at the beginning, if you'd treated me like a transaction." "I remember. I've thought about that question a lot." She looked down at the table for a moment. "I came to this town for my own reasons. I had my own mission. I wasn't looking for anything else." She looked back up. "And then I found you in Harlan's store, or Harlan found me through you, and you said the most transactional thing a man could say to a woman, and I should have walked away." "You should have," he agreed. "But you also listened," she said. "When I told you what I needed, when I told you that I would not be managed, that I would not be a convenience, you listened. And you didn't just listen and then go back to your own plan. You actually changed." She paused. "Men who are capable of changing, not because they're weak, but because they're honest enough to recognize when they're wrong, that's not something I'd encountered in a long time." He held very still. "I'm not staying because of the arrangement," she said. "I'm not staying because the ranch needs me, or because the federal case is better with me here." She held his gaze steadily, without performance, without armor. I'm staying because this is the first place in a very long time that has felt like somewhere I was actually seen." The sentence landed in the room and stayed there. "Seen," he said. "By you," she said. "Seen by you." He looked at her across the lamp and the papers, and the ordinary accumulated evidence of something neither of them had planned, and both of them had built, and he said, "Then stay." Not a question, not a legal term, not an arrangement. Just two words, direct and clean and true, from a man who had spent 20 years building something alone, and had only recently understood that building alone was a choice, not a necessity. "I was already planning to," she said. And for the first time, in as long as either of them could remember, longer than the courthouse, longer than the filing, longer than the particular exhaustion of fighting something enormous, without certainty of winning. They both simply sat with something that wasn't a problem to solve, or a threat to manage, or a document to review. Something that didn't need anything from them, except to be allowed to exist. The federal case against Nathaniel Crowe concluded 14 months later. It was not quick, and it was not clean. And there were moments during those 14 months when Vance sent telegrams that made Lily's jaw tighten, and Caleb's hands go still on whatever he was holding, and the kitchen go very quiet for an hour before one of them started talking again, and they figured out the next step. But it concluded. Crowe was found liable for land fraud across 4 counties and 2 territories. Forsyth was removed from public office. 3 other men lost their appointments. The board that had been assembled to take Anderson Ranch apart was itself dismantled, and the families whose land had been under threat, the 2 in the valley, the 1 in the next county, and 4 others who came forward. Once the federal case made it safe to do so, had their situations reviewed, and in most cases resolved. Oliver Patterson, who had submitted his conflict of interest statement and held his position through considerable pressure to recant, was quietly recognized within the territorial governance structure as a man of uncommon integrity. He sent Lily a brief letter when the case closed. It said, "Your documentation made this possible. Your father's name should be attached to it. I intend to see that it is." She read that letter at the kitchen table on a February morning with Caleb beside her, and the Montana winter making the windows shake, and the lamp burning between them the way it always burned. She folded it carefully. She set it down. She didn't cry, not because she wasn't moved, but because the grief had been given its time months ago in a spare room on a hard night, and what she felt now was something different, something that sat in the same place grief had been, but felt like solid ground instead of absence. "Your father's name," Caleb said, "in a federal record." She smoothed the letter with 2 fingers. He spent his whole life trying to do right by that land, and someone finally wrote it down. Caleb reached across the table and covered her hand with his. She turned her hand over and held his. Neither of them said anything. They didn't need to. That spring, Arthur Vance came to Anderson Ranch. Not for legal business that was done. He came because Lily had invited him, and because he had spent 2 years working alongside her documentation without ever meeting the woman who had built it, and because he wanted to understand, he said, what had made it possible. He arrived on a Thursday and stayed through the weekend, and on the Saturday afternoon, he sat on the fence near the North Water Gate with Caleb, while Lily and Walt walked the perimeter discussing something about the spring fencing schedule, and Vance watched her and said, "She told me when she first contacted me that she was doing this for her father." "She was," Caleb said. "She's doing something else now." Caleb followed Vance's gaze to where Lily was pointing something out to Walt, with her characteristic precision, not telling him, asking him the question that contains knowledge rather than requesting it. "What's she doing now?" Caleb said, though he knew. "She's building something," Vance said. "Something that lasts past the reason she started." Caleb looked at her, at the woman who had fixed a wheel with wire in an alley and hadn't looked up until she was ready, who had walked into a courthouse on 11 hours of marriage and held the whole thing together by being the most honest person in the room, who had carried 18 months of dangerous documentation through 3 territories alone and never once asked anyone to notice. "She does that," he said. Vance looked at him. "So do you." Caleb turned back to the fence line. "I had good material to work with," he said. Vance laughed, a real laugh surprised out of him. You know, when Lily first described her situation to me in a telegram, she said she had found an unexpected complication. I'm the complication. You were. Vance smiled. You've been upgraded. On a Sunday in May, 7 months after the courthouse, 2 months after the federal case concluded, Caleb found Lily at the Northwater Gate at sunset. She went there sometimes. He had noticed this over the months, that when she needed to think, or when something had moved her, or when the particular weight of what they had survived pressed down briefly before lifting again, she went to the Watergate, the place that had been the most vulnerable point of the ranch, the place that had almost been taken from them. He understood why. He went there sometimes too. He came up beside her, and they stood together, the way they stood now, naturally, without arranging themselves, the easy closeness of people who have stopped calculating distance. Vance leaves tomorrow, she said. I know. He wants to write about the case, formally. He thinks it could be used as a model for other federal filings against land consolidation. What do you think? I think he should. She paused. I told him he could use my documentation, my name, everything. I don't want it hidden. It won't be, Caleb said. She turned to look at him. The light at that hour in Montana in May is the kind of light that makes everything look exactly as significant as it actually is, warm and golden and completely honest. You said something to me, she said. In the courthouse after the ruling. You said you weren't thinking about the ranch. I remember. And I asked you what you were thinking about. And I told you. You said you didn't want to walk in without me beside you. She held his gaze. I've thought about that sentence almost every day since. What conclusion did you reach? She looked at him for a moment, a long moment, with the full attention she brought to everything that mattered. That it's the most honest thing anyone has ever said to me, she said. Not the most romantic, not the most dramatic, the most honest. She paused. Because it wasn't about needing me. It was about wanting me there. Those two things are completely different, and most people never learn the difference. He looked at her. I know the difference now, he said. I know you do. Something in her face, the last residue of caution, the final careful distance she had maintained, even as everything else had closed, released. Not dramatically. Quietly. The way tension releases from something that has been held long enough to trust what it's resting on. That's why I'm still here. He reached out and took her hand. She let him. They stood at the Northwater Gate, while the May light moved across the Montana plain, vast and indifferent and entirely beautiful. And the ranch settled into the particular evening quiet of a place that is genuinely, solidly, unquestionably home. He had walked into Harlan's General Store 19 months ago, needing something convenient. He had needed a wife by tomorrow. What he had found was something that no deadline could have manufactured, and no legal document could have created, and no amount of planning could have produced. A woman who had looked at the worst version of his offer and asked why before she said yes. A partner who had brought her own fight to his door and never once asked to be thanked for it. A person who saw his land, the way he saw it, not as property, but as something held in trust bigger than any one person, worth protecting at real cost. And something else. Something that had grown in the spaces between all of it, in the kitchen at 3 in the morning and on the courthouse steps, and in a spare room where grief was finally given its due, and at a table covered in documents where two people kept choosing repeatedly to be honest with each other when dishonesty would have been easier. He had needed a wife by tomorrow. He had found the person he wanted beside him for the rest of his life, and she who had come to this town for her father, for justice, for the long, slow work of making a wrong thing, right, had found something she had not known she was still capable of wanting: a place to land. A person who saw her. A life built not on convenience or necessity, or the particular desperation of a man with 19 hours to save everything he'd built, but on the daily chosen, unspectacular, irreplaceable fact of two people who had decided that the other one was worth the trouble of being completely known. Caleb once believed he needed a wife by tomorrow. What he found was something far greater. He found the person he wanted beside him forever. And she found that forever, it turned out, was not a legal term, or a romantic promise, or a clause in a contract. It was a Tuesday morning with coffee and a pencil and a map of a ranch you'd learned to love because the person who showed it to you loved it first. It was the quiet after a hard thing. It was choosing to stay when leaving was possible. It was being seen. And in the end, in the long, ordinary, luminous end, that was everything.